Revived Thoughts is a production of Revive Studios.
This is Troy and Joel, and you are listening to the Revive Thoughts Deep Dive on the Taiping Rebellion Part 2. If you are just now finding this episode and you haven't listened to Part 1, you are more than welcome to listen to it, but I do think that this story might be very confusing without the Part 1, so feel free to keep listening or go back and find Part 1 and make sure you listen to that so you understand a little bit about where we are going. Just as kind of a short recap for those who listen to this and it's been a few weeks, few months for you. We are going through the story of a man who lived in China who got some visions that he was Jesus's brother. And after reading a pamphlet, an evangelistic pamphlet, he came to Christ, or at least so he thinks. I think there's definitely some questionableness whether he was actually a Christian. And slowly he started a movement to rid China of demons and to make the evil race that runs China in his mind, the Qing Empire, go down and replace it with his own heavenly kingdom. That's what he thinks God has sent him on earth to do. And he's been very successful. He's managed to conquer the old capital city, not the current capital, which is Beijing, but the old capital, which is Nanjing, or Nanking, as it's usually referred to. He's got 2 million people under his control. He's got multiple armies now. He's lost some people along the way, but overall, he has done wildly more successful than I think anybody could have thought he would have done, and doing it while having these mystical visions, and these people come up to him, claims he's Jesus's brother. He has another person that's speaking who claims to be the voice of God himself, and anything he says is actually from God. And it's quite a wild ride. And as I said, he has 2 million people now under his control. They force you every Sunday to go to church. It's against the law to skip church. You are required to read the Bible in the morning, to pray in the morning every single day. And I mean, if you didn't know much about them, this would look like a Christian kingdom. And to many people around the world, this was a Christian kingdom. Even Karl Marx himself said, hey, this looks like a communist utopia we could get behind. There is no private property. Everything must be shared. It is quite a unique place. But when we scratch below the surface, we find that this does not seem to be a Christian kingdom that you and I would recognize. Many people are being murdered for not following the 10 Commandments laws that he has decided are killable if you do not follow them. They do not put a lot of stock in the New Testament, as we're going to go into in this episode more. And the king himself, the heavenly brother, Jesus Christ's brother, Hong Xiuquan, has now taken up residence in the old palace of Nanking and has now given himself many concubines and extra wives because he believes that's what a king should have after all. And that is kind of where we left things off. He has taken over a large portion of China, and he is now holding up in the castle with multiple women. And we asked the question, is this something he would have done from the beginning, or is this something that, he had the opportunity, so he took it? The pressure of leading 2 million people broke down I don't know. There's a lot of questions we can go into. There's no real clear answer. But that's where he currently is sitting right now, is in the old capital of China, millions of people under his control, with a host of concubines and wives now at his disposal. Not just his, the voice of God now has multiple wives and concubines. All of the people who he's been leading with are now putting themselves in, palaces, and very much the same situation.
Hong Xiuquan, right? That's the name of our main guy.
Yeah. Xiuquan. It's I know it's a difficult name. I had somebody write in, they said, thank you so much for kind of reiterating who each name was, because if you're not familiar with these names, they do definitely sound a little different. But our main guy, Hong Xiuquan, is the leader of this movement. He is the quote-unquote guy. And throughout this episode and the last episode, he's the guy we're following. There are other characters that play in. There are other people who get involved, but he's the guy. He's the one that has everything kind of surrounding him.
And remind me again what year we're at right now. Where are we at in history?
We are right around the year 1855 and 1856. He got his first couple visions. Well, his first couple visions happened long before he found out, he quote unquote became a Christian in the late 1840s. His first visions happened when he had a mental breakdown because he didn't pass the civil service exams in like the 1830s and 1840s. But his real movement kicked off in 1848, 49, 50, and we've been following him, and it's taken about 5 years to cross a very large portion of China. I said if you were looking at an American map, you would be starting in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico with a small group of like 100 bandits, basically, and you'd be moving across all the way, walking all the way to Washington, D.C., conquering cities as you go, and by the end of it, you're now in control of 2 million people, multiple 100,000 person armies, and you've kind of conquered a streak across those lands, and that's a pretty big area, and especially in a place like China where, even one city can have hundreds of thousands of people in it. You're now in control of a lot of people's lives and destinies.
What's the relationship with the Chinese government at this point? Like, what does the Chinese government look like at this point? And are they threatened by this? Like, are they overrun? Are they, equally matched? What's the relation between them and what
it's
China's
actually kind
doing?
of the next part we get into is we're going to look at them a little bit more. But just as a quick overview, the Qing Empire came into power when the Manchu people, which are kind of from Mongolia, took over China in the 1600s. They've been running the show for give or take almost 400 years, but things have really decayed and become corrupt. They're not what they once were. At the highlight of their power, they were very strong, and China was quite a beast, or at least it was pretty good. This is not that time. They're really an empire in decline, and the fact that the Taiping Rebellion can do as much as it's doing is proof of just how much things have kind of fallen apart. And if you remember, now they do not like the Taiping Rebellion. They're not friends with the Heavenly Kingdom. They see this as, basically Confederates or an insurrection or, whatever you want to call it. This is a rebellion, a civil war in their mind, and they need to stamp this thing and put it down. They've actually sent a couple armies after Hong Xiuquan, but he's managed to defeat each of their armies before they could take him out. And the generals are getting either executed or committing suicide for their dishonorable failure to capture this guy. So it's a big deal. They're not playing around. But he's managed to beat the local armies, and now Beijing is going to start sending their top armies after him. But there is a problem, and we'll get into that in a minute, but there is a problem, and that is that Beijing is not just in this one war with the Taiping. They're actually in several wars. And one thing we've been talking about, too, is Taiping Rebellion is not the only rebellion happening during this time. If you remember in the first episode, we also mentioned that the Taiping people have been pushing back against the Buddhists, the Confucian temples, destroying their temples, destroying their demons, but they're going out of their way not to touch the mosques because they're hoping that the Muslims will also rebel, and that will make it harder for the Qing Empire to conquer them. And their dream actually comes true. We're going to talk about here in a minute. I'm reading some of my notes here, but you're going to be listening how the Muslims actually do go through multiple rebellions. And so the Qing Empire is just fighting a war on every front. And on the one hand, this is overwhelming, and I feel a little bad for them because who could take on all this stuff that's going to happen? On the other side, you did it to yourselves by not taking care of your people and by just running a really corrupt, out-of-date system that was really helpful to the people in charge, but terrible pretty much for everyone else.
All right. Well, let's hear it. What's happening next?
All right. So the first thing we're going to find out is the Taiping army has now taken this place called Nanking over, and they are now sending an army up north. They decide to start splitting.
Let me interrupt you.
Go ahead.
Let me interrupt you again. Can you just reiterate again? I know this guy's name is Hong Xiuquan.
Yeah.
I know you explained it on the last episode. Can you explain why they're called Taiping again?
Taiping just means heavenly kingdom. And so they believe they're bringing the Bible's heavenly kingdom from God to China. They believe that their goal is to Christianize China, that in his vision, he believed he saw that China was being run by demons. And so their job is to kill the demons, destroy the idols, wipe out the Buddhists, the Confucianists, the Taoists, everyone there that's not a Christian, basically, destroy their temples, force them to live in a Christian government, and create a heavenly kingdom. And you don't get a choice. Like there's a sword to your head, you do it or you don't. But they've been successful so far, and they've really attracted a lot of people to their movement, not so much because China's full of Christians, but because a lot of people hate the Qing Empire, and they see this as an opportunity to get at them. They also see these guys if you remember, I told you every time they took over a town, they would take the wealthy people's stuff and just give it to everybody. So you'd have, peasant guards and farmers wearing like silk dresses and beautiful crowns and stuff that they sold, because the Taiping believed that, we're supposed to share everything like it says in Acts 2 and Acts 4. And so they're doing that. Well, if you see a group of people attacking the government you hate and giving all the money away, that's really popular, even if you're maybe not, you don't care as much about the Bible stuff, but you're liking what you're seeing. And so the Taiping just means heavenly kingdom in their language.
Gotcha. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I just needed to get on my bearings.
No, it's a good question. All right. Around this time, they're in Nanking. Two rather strong armies led by two different groups are going to show up in Beijing. They're going to attack this group of people, the Heavenly Kingdom, from two different directions. They're not strong enough to stop the Taiping Rebellion, but they are strong enough to basically block the direct road they've been marching. They've been marching all the way to Nanking and just kind of going as they please, doing what they want, but now the road is blocked by these armies. So instead of doing that, they decide we're going to have to send one army ahead by itself. And this is a big mistake, but they don't know it yet. One thing they have an advantage over, though, is they have something the Qing Empire currently doesn't have, and that is a navy. Now, you would think the Qing Empire should have a navy, and they do. We'll talk about what happens to their navy here in a minute. But they don't have a navy when these two armies show up. So the Taiping army loads up 200 vessels and sends a navy ahead of them. And to me, this is just wild. It's basically like, I'm trying to picture it in today's terms. Imagine Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri rebel against the United States federal America, and one guy is able to lead an army and take over those three states. And when the United States government comes to attack them, imagine Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri has an air force, and the United States government doesn't. Like, that's what we're dealing with here. Somehow the Qing Empire is so just broken during this time that they don't have one of the basic tools of fighting a war, which is a navy, but this guy, the Taiping guy, Hong Xiuquan, does. And so this boats just go right around these two armies, and they drop an army off right over on the other side of them. And it's just, to me, that is just a fascinating thing. Like, how do you get so bad at fighting war? How do you get so broken as a country that your rebels have a navy and you do not? They send 70,000 of their veterans up ahead of them using the boats, and they're going to have them march on Beijing. Their idea is basically, if we can take the capital, if we can take Beijing, this war is over. We've got this. They can't fight us once they lose this. And up until now, every time you would see a pattern where they would attack a city, they siege it, they would take it over, people would rally to their cause, and their army would get bigger, and then they'd move on to the next city, and this just kept happening, right? Not anymore. In the north, unlike the south of China, the people are different. They're ethnically a different group of people altogether. Geographically, just everything's different. They're in South China, it's hot, it's sweaty, it's a rainy season. They eat different foods. They speak a different dialect of Chinese. Everything is different in this top side of China, and they're not at all getting the people and the hearts of the people on their side anymore. Instead of looking like the super cool Christian kingdom where everyone's fighting back, this looks like an army of invaders, a group of people from a different part of China trying to take over and undo their way of life. And on top of that, the southern Chinese army is not used to winter. They haven't really had to deal with snow. They haven't really had to deal with harsh blizzards and icy frosts and stuff like that. They're completely unprepared for what it's like to fight in northern China. I mean, northern China, I used to live in northern China. It's parallel in parts to Russia. And so imagine, the age-old story of trying to invade Russia in winter and how that goes for countries that have tried to do that. Well, that's what northern China is. It's basically the same temperatures, parts of Russia, and it goes about the same way. If you are used to the hot southern part of China, if you're used to Miami, Florida, and you try to invade Alaska, how's that going to go for you? That's maybe an extreme, but you're getting the idea of what they're up against. on top of that too, northern China has been in more wars and stuff for a long time. They have built thicker walls. The Great Wall of China is in northern China. They have more fortified cities. And so they're not taking cities with nearly as much speed as they were in southern China. Things are not going well for this group of soldiers that they send up. It's basically a death march. They do really poorly up there. However, oh, and one more thing, too. They've actually been dealing with their own revolutionary force that has already been fighting against the Qing Empire called the Neon Empire Revolution. We've talked about them in the first episode. These are this group of horseback riders. They're very powerful. The Taiping wanted to ally with them, but the Neon would never really show up when you needed them. And sometimes they would even fight against the Taiping for money. You would want them to be on your side, but they weren't. They were these horseback riding people. But the thing is, if you wanted to rebel against the Qing Empire, you already had a group to do that with this other group called the Neon. You didn't need the Taiping people. And so they weren't answering the need of, do you want to fight back? Here we are. We've already got our own group. We don't need a second group up here. They still do really well, though, all things considered. They are veterans, and they are pretty powerful. They managed to make it within 130 kilometers or 83 miles from Beijing, arriving at the nearby city of Tianjin. That is very, very close. Again, if they started in the Gulf of Mexico, they walked all the way to Washington, D.C. Now they have sailed and then crossed and fought their way up to basically Ottawa, Canada. They have made it a really long ways, and they've done very well. But once they get to Tianjin, they are sieged in. The Qing army is ready and does not give up. The people do not join them, and they end up sieged inside of Tianjin and are not able to get out. Further, the winter is way tougher. They do not get supplies. Recruits and new forces and reinforcements don't come. The Taiping Rebellion is still dealing with those armies blocking the way. They haven't crossed through, and so they're not able to send them fresh troops, and they're not able to get the help they need. If you remember in the first episode, we said that Beijing is connected way down to the south by a thing called the Grand Canal. It's just as impressive in a lot of ways as the Great Wall of China. It took 1,500 years to build, and these boats were, able to cross 1,000 kilometers or 1,500 kilometers, whatever it is, a very long ways. Well, that canal goes through Tianjin, and the enemy army, the Qing, realized if they basically, in the same way that the Taiping Rebellion started controlling that canal and cut off supplies to the people of Beijing, well, the people of Beijing realized this army stuck in the city right next to Beijing, we can basically use this canal against them. And they basically flood the canal and flood the city. Many of the army soldiers of the Taiping drown, and as they're trying to get away from the flood, they completely wipe them out. They capture the leader of this army, they execute him, and that's as close as the Taiping Rebellion will ever get to the capital of the Qing Empire. But 80 miles away is still pretty impressive. It took them 2 years just to deal with that army. And again, it once again shows you just how powerful the Taiping movement was. If a couple things had gone differently, maybe they would have succeeded. While they were busy doing that, the Taiping still had those other two armies from Beijing going on, so they split their forces as well. One would stay inside of Nanjing and hold down the fort, and the other would move around from different provinces. It takes this province next to their area, full of supplies and resources. They're able to wipe out more imperial armies as they're being sent, and things are looking pretty good. Sure, that one army that went north, it didn't go well for them, but if you stayed south, you're doing pretty well and you're staying pretty fortified, all things considered. In fact, the Qing actually raised up a navy to try to fight them, but this army was able to defeat that navy, and that's why they didn't have a navy, was because of this war down south. So they did really well. However, all of this fighting with Beijing was hurting their numbers and slowly starting to take soldiers away. The Heavenly Kingdom isn't quite coming together as smoothly as originally thought. But there are two things that are keeping the Heavenly Kingdom from losing completely. The Heavenly Kingdom, on paper, the Qing Empire should be able to completely wipe them out. They have numbers and resources on their side. But there are two big things that keep it from happening. The first is they have these other rebellions. As I mentioned earlier, the Muslims have now begun rebelling against the Qing too. There are two really large rebellions and a bunch of other ones too. If you remember in the first episode, it was rebellion after rebellion I kept talking about. But the two big ones here are the Ponte Rebellion, which goes on from 1856 to 1873. This rebellion you've never heard of it probably, but it cost the lives of 2 million people during this time of unrest. And it also caused basically millions of people around China to have to move their homes. It was started when a Chinese official was a young man. He was surrounded by a mob of Muslims. He was beaten by this mob and stripped naked for some offense. It really hurt him. When he got older and control, he then began to pursue anti-Muslim policies that led to a revolt, and that revolt went on for 2 decades. He basically used the levers of power to get his revenge. That led to a revolt. There was British officers who said this really wasn't a religious war, it was more of a cultural war, but either way, that's one big revolt that's going on in South China at this time. Another one is called the Dungan Revolt. And this one is even bigger, and it's even more confusing because there's actually an exactly same named revolt that happens in the late 1890s in the exact same areas, but they're 2 different revolts, 2 different Dungan revolts. And this one is basically Muslims everywhere hitting back against the Qing. It's a little bit separated from the other one due to regions and groups of people, but it's still happening at the same time as the other one. It lasts for 15 years, and when it's over, between famines, disease, migrations, and deaths, 21 million people have left the region where it started. I mean, 21 million people died, but it just means that that area is going to have 21 million people less living in it due to people fleeing, moving, and death, and disease, and all of that stuff going on. We won't go into all the details of this revolt because let me tell you, when I was researching it, it's long, it's complicated, and I don't even know if I fully understand what happens in that revolt. But you got all that going on the one side. So you've got the Taiping, you've got these Muslim revolts, you've got just all of this chaos happening on one side. And then you have something else that's happening that's a really big deal on the outside, and that is that at the time in Hong Kong, there was a rule that British ships could sail under the British flag, and they were not allowed to have any problems with the Chinese people. After the first Opium War, that was the rules Britain set for China. You can't bother British ships. Well, a lot of Chinese captains would basically just hire a British captain to be over their ship. He would never have to even step foot on that ship, but it would allow them to sail with a British flag no matter what. And so a lot of British people would just sit on port, they would have a good time, they'd make money, and they'd have multiple ships under their names that they've never even seen before, but they were technically on paper the captains of these different ships. Well, one of these ships landed in Guangzhou, and it was called the Arrow. It had been registered by a British captain, but actually the registration on it had long expired. And even before it was registered, the Arrow was known as a pirate ship. It was not a friendly ship at all. They had just registered themselves under a British name at one point. And the captain told this story about how his crew was arrested and the British flag was ripped off and stepped all over. But this was most likely a completely false story, and the ship would have never had that happen. It's definitely a tall tale. However, this ship was arrested. 12 of the men were running the ship at the time. 9 of them were released, but 3 of them were kept because they were sailing an expired tagged ship. It sounds like something the DMV would get you on, but also because they were recognized as wanted pirates. And they said, no, we know these guys. They're wanted pirates. We had them on earlier pirate charges, so we're going to arrest them. That seems perfectly reasonable to me. But Britain did not think so, and they used it as leverage to open the Second Opium War. Now, if you read this story and you go, well, Britain did not do this because they really were worried about this one pirate ship. I'm telling you, this is one of those situations where Britain was looking for an excuse to get into China, and they used this, quote unquote, public international crisis to start the Second Opium War. The First Opium War went really well for Britain, but they saw that they could get more. The First War gave them trading deals, markets, and access to China. They figured a swift second war would do the same thing, and in reality, it kind of does. This war goes very brutally for China. China is already overwhelmed with all these brutal rebellions. If you remember the first episode, we talked about all the different bandits. Guangzhou is, during this war, completely burned to the ground at one point by the British. This is a terrible war for them, and one of the things that makes it so rough is it keeps getting worse. Britain jumps in on the war first. They declare the war because of this whole pirate ship problem. But then the French say, hey, wait a second. We also went on this war because we want better trading deals. We want more ports. We want a chance. They say that one of their missionaries was executed for sharing the faith. And so then they use that as their excuse to jump in the war. Well, when America hears about that, they go, well, we also want some of the war. America kind of claims to be neutral, but they take a few forts and they throw supplies to the British. The Russia then also jumps in and goes, we want the war as well. Russia will do nothing in this war, will not help anybody at all, but will take part of Mongolia when the war is all said and done. And this is not a good time for the Qing Empire. So part of the reason the Qing Empire is not able to deal with all these problems and not able to deal with the Taiping is because they're fighting a war against, four of the most powerful countries in the world at that time, Russia, Britain, America, and France. The British launched 2 major attacks into China, the one that went into Guangzhou that burnt one of their major capitals. I mean, this is a big city. Think Miami or Dallas. I mean, this is a huge area that's absolutely just laid waste. The other army will arrive in a place called Dalian, which is just a little bit south of Beijing. They'll march up through Tianjin, which they will capture 1 year after the Taiping army had been there. You got to kind of wonder, if the Taiping army hadn't been flooded out and had been there when the British showed up, would the British have allied with them? What would have happened? Well, we'll never know. And then they march their way into Beijing. Now, in response to hearing the British are basically destroying them, the Chinese start to arrest and kill the foreigners within China, and it's very awful. Here's a quote from some of the people living in Beijing at the time. They say, the prisoners had been tortured, they had their limbs bound with ropes, their flesh was lacerated, they became infected with maggots, they had dung and dirt forced into their throats, several were executed by beheading, their corpses were fed to animals, captured people who had worked with them, who had worked for the Allies, were buried up to their necks and left to be fed to dogs. Now, is that just propaganda to rally the moral citizens against the war, or did that really happen? It seems that it probably did, and this torture really upset the British Army. They wanted to get revenge. Now, they didn't want to really hurt the Chinese people, but they really wanted to hurt the Emperor of China himself because they saw this as his fault, basically. They considered a couple different options. We could burn down the Forbidden City, or we could destroy his summer palace. And they decided the summer palace hurts the emperor more, and the Forbidden City is an old cultural relic. So they burnt down the summer palace of the emperor. The emperor, he escapes out of Beijing. He runs away. And to be fair, the French saw them doing it, and they actually said, we refuse to participate. This is a beautiful old palace. It's not the Chinese people's fault. It took 2 full days of looting and fires before it was completely burnt down. The Europeans should not have been able to win this battle. They were outnumbered 10-1, but they absolutely demolished the Qing Empire. The emperor himself, while he's running away, will die. It's unclear specifically what kills him, but he had lived in a happy life of indulgence and parties and concubines while his country was under nonstop chaos. So I'm not really shedding any tears that he died. His palace is destroyed. His country is taken basically for hostage by these foreign empires. All of the treaties that end up getting signed will give them new ports, new lands. Russia will just take a large part of Mongolia just because, even though they didn't actually do anything in the war hardly. Britain will add more land that it can kind of basically oversee. And Christians, a positive, are now legally allowed to evangelize and own property inside of China. That's one positive. A giant negative in reverse is opium is now legal. You are now forced to sell it. And this is going to be devastating for the people. And this is a terrible treaty for the Qing. But they're completely, their capital is captured. They're completely held hostage. What can they do? Here's a quote I found on it. It says, the defeat of the Qing army by a small Anglo-French military force that numbered at least 10-1 by the Qing army, coupled with the flight and subsequent death of their emperor, and the burning of the summer palace was a shocking blow to the once powerful Qing Empire. Beyond a doubt, by 1860, the ancient civilization that China had been thoroughly defeated and humiliated by the West. Further, the Qing now owed Britain and France repayments for the money that they lost fighting the war. So not only did they now have these terrible treaties that were exorbitant and holding them hostage, they now had to pay for the war to defend themselves from these foreign invaders who now invaded them and controlled them. The sentiment in China really was the Qing are ruining our lives and we don't like them. And the Qing seemed to be tearing China apart with every decision they made. They failed to fight the foreign invaders. They're failing to deal with any of the rebellions. And people began to say, hey, maybe we need to modernize China. Maybe it's time to reform it. There was this group that showed up during this time called the Self-Strengthening Movement, trying to reform and change China. And this didn't just affect China. Japan next door watched what happened. They had already been opened up by Commodore Perry, who arrived in 1853, but they looked at their old enemy China and they went, yikes, like that's what the West can do to you when they want to. And they jumped on board. They said, we need to modernize, we need to westernize, or we'll end up in the same situation as the Qing is. So going back to the Taiping Rebellion, this giant loss would look like a good thing for them, right? The Qing Empire is being humiliated. This should make the Taiping stronger. And at first, it did. New people came and joined the heavenly kingdom because this seemed like the great alternative to the Qing Empire. They were being defeated by the West and the Muslim rebellion, so they couldn't deal with this Taiping Rebellion. But eventually, this would hurt the Taiping Rebellion as well. And we'll kind of see how that does towards the end. Now, I said once that they came to Nanking, and things really took a turn, and this is true. Hong Xiuquan began to show signs of maybe mental decline. If you remember his story, he kept having these visions. He had 3 mental breakdowns, but all of his advisors and administrators were starting to become concerned maybe this was happening again. He had just basically stopped doing his job as a leader. He was the guy who started the movement. The entire movement is built on him. Imagine if Martin Luther in the middle of the Protestant Reformation just stopped writing books and just hung out with a bunch of extra wives all day inside a house. That would be a pretty big deal, right? Well, that's what the leader of the quote-unquote holy, quote-unquote heavenly kingdom is now suddenly doing, and millions of people have put their life on this guy. Now, it could be that he was struggling with the stress of the movement. I'll give you credit. If you were running a 2 million man empire against a giant old empire, you might be stressed out, and he's already had multiple mental breakdowns. Maybe all these people shouldn't have put their trust in him in the first place. Whatever the case is, though, he completely is retreating and things are beginning to fall apart. But there are other people around him. And one of these people that he gave the title, the East King, who also calls himself the voice of God, is sitting there. And he is a very good leader. He actually has real leadership skills. He has administrative skills. He's excellent. He's very good at military strategy. He knows what he's doing. And Xiuquan, our main guy, is annoyed by him because the voice of God would often get a vision and speak to him. And what could Xiuquan say? This guy is, quote unquote, the voice of God, after all. He'd even give orders to Hong Xiuquan and say, hey, I got a vision from God. He says you have to do this. And what can you do? You've already told everyone he's the voice of God. And if you disagree with him and you start to question where his authority lies, well, that basically begins to question the whole thing, doesn't it? If you're the heavenly king, you find this annoying, and Hong did. But he was willing to put up for it for a time when things were going well. But the army is beginning to become divided. They sent armies up north. Things are not going well. They have these 2 armies sitting outside them. And eventually, after a 3-year siege, in 1856, those 2 armies are destroyed. Now, the voice of God, his name is Yang Xiuqing, very similar to our other guy. Yang Xiuqing, not to be confused with Hong Xiuquan, had a large network of spies. If you've ever heard of the TV show Game of Thrones, which is a worldly show, don't watch it, right? But there's a guy in that show called Littlefinger who has spies everywhere who constantly keeps him informed. That's the kind of guy this guy seems to be. A worm tongue from Lord of the Rings, always gets little messages. That's the kind of guy we're dealing with here. He always knows what's going on. And Xiuquan now had given everyone these new titles, and he gives this title to this man. Now, he's already got the title Voice of God. He's already got the title East King. But as they've officially defeated those Beijing armies, they won the siege, he gives his royal advisors new titles. And his title for himself is this title, quote, Long live 10,000 years. That's a normal title. My name is Long live 10,000 years. And then he names his sons Long live 1,000 years. That over there is long live 1,000 years. And he gives the 4 kings long live 9,000 years. That's your title. When you saw them on the street, you could call him the East King. You could call him the voice of God. But what you were supposed to say was, hey, there's long live 9,000 years. Well, the voice of God summons Hong Xiuquan to his palace, his own palace that he has set up. And he says basically, hey, I am the name long live 9,000 years. But I've done so much for the kingdom. I think God was telling me in a vision that I should actually be called long live 10,000 years. Don't you think? Isn't that what God is saying to you as well? And Hong Xiuquan is kind of like, oh my goodness, what do I do? How do I deal with this? Maybe God is saying, oh, you know what? Yeah, I think I got the same vision. God is saying that. And the guy's like, I thought so. I'm also long live 10,000 years too. Thank you for coming to my palace to clarify. I'd love to talk with you some more, but I have I need to go into another vision. God is calling me to heaven real quick, so I got to let you go. So sorry. Love to see you. See you later. Now, the voice of God, if you haven't noticed, he just made himself equal to our main guy, Hong Xiuquan, and he's also basically then told him, get lost, I'm having a vision from God. He's one-upping him in power, but how do you call him out when he does stuff like that? Nanjing doesn't have a very large army surrounding it right now. They only have 20,000 soldiers, but these 20,000 soldiers have been commanded for the last 9 or 10 years by, quote unquote, the voice of God. They're loyal to him. Hong Xiuquan may be the guy leading the rebellion. He may be the face of it, but the army is loyal to this other guy. The voice of God sends the only other king, the Wing King, Shi Kadai, one of the other guys, and sends him on a battle out there somewhere. And so Hong Xiuquan now is alone inside the city with, quote unquote, the voice of God working together. And Hong says he gets a message from one of his own people that the voice of God is planning to assassinate him. Is this true? We don't know. We only have his side of the story. You certainly could see it happen. He just made himself an equal of Hong Xiuquan. He sent the other king far away to battle. It's certainly possible. He's a crafty guy. On the other hand, though, if you're Yang Xiuqing, the voice of God, do you really need to assassinate the leader? He gets to be the face of it while you get to be the powerful right hand. Things are looking pretty good for you, and you're running the city well. Why would you kill the main guy? It just depends. Maybe you just like power. Maybe you want to be the face. Maybe you think he's holding you back. Whatever it is, Hong Xiuquan, our main guy, the number one guy, decides he's got to get rid of him. He secretly summons one of his generals. He brings them in with an army, and suddenly there's a civil war happening right in the middle of the heavenly kingdom. 27,000 of the Taiping Kingdom soldiers are killed in this battle while Hong Xiuquan is trying to take out, quote unquote, the voice of God. And remember, this is Taiping versus Taiping. The Qing Empire is just gaining from this. They're not even a part of this. Everyone who dies as a part of this rebellion that's happening is in the heavenly kingdom. The other general wins, and he's able to capture the voice of God, and he kills him for the guy. He then takes his wife and concubines, all 54 of them. Yes, the voice of God, just like our main guy, had been given and blessed the opportunity to have multiple wives, and he had 54 multiple wives and concubines, and all of them are killed. Now, this general who's chosen to do this is a man named General Wei, and General Wei begins to kill everyone he thinks is loyal, and he's under the impression that pretty much everyone is loyal to the voice of God. He begins to suspect everyone and starts purging the army everywhere. Well, the Wing King comes back, Shi Kadai. He sees what's happening with Wei killing all the soldiers, basically, and tells them he must be stopped. General Wei sees the Wing King return and tries to stop him. He goes, oh, you must be working for the voice of God, and he kills the Wing King. So now the Wing King, or he tries to, the Wing King gets away. The Wing King almost is killed. He doesn't end up killing him, but he does kill his family. So the Wing King gets away. He's chased out of Nanjing. His family is killed. General Wei is killing everyone. And this is not good. The Wing King goes back outside the Nanjing area, groups some armies together, and begins sieging the city. Now, the Taiping Rebellion is under siege by the Taiping Rebellion. The soldiers inside the wall are supporting the Wing King. They're trying to escape because General Wei is purging and killing everyone, and they also think it was pretty uncool of General Wei to kill the other guy's family. General Wei realizes public sentiment is against him. He panics. He actually tries to kill Hong Xiuquan, the guy in his palace, sends an army to kill him. Hong's loyal men hold them off, and Hong reaches out to the guys who are loyal to the voice of God, the guys who have been kind of hiding out. And he says, hey, this is your chance to redeem yourself. If you guys who have been loyal to the voice of God, save me now. It'll be water under the bridge, and I'll let you guys live. The guys who are loyal to the voice of God, there's 200 of them hiding throughout the city. They show up, and they kill General Wei. They kill his followers. They send his head to the Wing King, and the Wing King goes, okay, it's cool. You killed the guy who killed my family. I'm still upset my family's dead, but we'll call off the siege. And our main guy, Hong Xiuquan, stays in power. But things are not good. The dream is over. The idea of a heavenly kingdom, the mask is ripped off. Suddenly, this utopian Christian thing is not looking so good. All of the generals just got in this horrible, brutal war, killing themselves, and our main guy hid in a palace with his concubines until he was almost assassinated. And everyone suddenly goes, that doesn't look like a heavenly kingdom like I've been promised. The voice of God, the whole thing that this started around, he was a very capable administrator. He was very good at what he did. And him being killed, there was no one left to take his place. Not only was he killed, but after this, the Wing King takes off because his family's dead. He's done. Other kings have basically disappeared. We talked about how several of them were assassinated. And the Taiping citizens, tens of thousands of them died in this back and forth war. The people feel like the dream is over. Now, to make up for the loss of leadership, Xiuquan institutes 2 of his brothers into the royal kingly line. He calls one the Blessed King and the other the Peaceful King. But nobody's really happy with this. And as I said, the Wing King takes his army and leaves. He's done with this whole thing. Now, as he's leaving, the Qing Empire take advantage of the Wing King, and they begin to attack and take lands back. It looked like the Qing Empire was about to move forward, but they don't because of the Neon Rebellion, the Opium War, and everything else. One big mistake, in a sense, was that the Taiping Rebellion and the Qing were fighting in a sense of total war. This was the first of its kind. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between the Opium War and the Taiping Rebellion? Because I thought, not obviously now that we're going through it, but historically, I thought those were related and or the same or overlapped, but they are separate events. Is that what you're saying?
Well, as we said, the first Opium War happened long before all this. The second, not long, but about 10 years before all this started. The second Opium War happens at the same time. So while China is fighting the Taiping Rebellion on the inside, on the outside, Britain and France are invading, taking ports, burning down Beijing. As we said, the one army that went north, if they had just held that city for 1 year longer, they would have the Opium War armies of the British and French would have shown up, maybe even to help them take Beijing. We don't know what would have happened there. But so they are overlapping. They're not the same war.
But they're unrelated entirely.
Yeah. It would be basically like if during the American Civil War, also America was fighting the Nazis, right? Like they're two different wars in a sense. Like some soldiers are fighting in the Taiping Rebellion and some soldiers are being sent to fight off the Nazis. But the problem is, you when you're fighting outside of yourself, and really wouldn't be fighting the Nazis, it'd be more like the War of 1812 where the British invade America. But when you're fighting two different wars, your armies are split in half, all your resources are split, etc. And the Opium Wars, they're not winning. They're losing badly. And so how many soldiers can you send down to Taiping to take on the Heavenly King when when Beijing's being burned, right? Like, can you really afford to send that many people? No. So those armies are really on their own. And so, yeah, these wars are overlapping, but they're fought by the same guy. But the Qing are fighting both of these wars, but one war is getting more attention. Until the Opium War is over, Qing can't really focus on the Taiping Rebellion or the Muslim rebellions that are happening across China as well. They have to focus on getting the foreign war dealt with, and then they can deal with it. Once the foreign war is ended in 1860, then they can really begin to put their focus more on the Taiping Rebellion. That's when you'll start to see the ropes kind of tightening around. The noose is starting to get tighter once that starts to happen.
Gotcha.
One of the problems with this war too is that the Qing and Taiping Rebellion are fighting total war. And what that means is when they take a city, they kill everybody in it. And when the other side takes a city, they kill everybody in it. They burn the farmland so you can't use it as resources. They crush everything in their way. China had never really fought a war like this, and I'm sure they had. It's a very long country, but this is one of the first modern, quote-unquote, modern wars where both sides are basically doing it. It started with the Qing. The Qing were basically like, kill all the heretics, kill them all. And the Taiping Rebellion responded by, well, we'll do the same. But the problem is when both sides surrender is not accepted, we'll kill anybody who surrenders. Well, when both sides fight that way, neither side has a reason to surrender, and so they just fight to the death. And this becomes a very extreme, exterminate everybody in the rebellion part of it. Qing wants every ounce of this rebellion destroyed so they don't have to see it again. But because they have this no surrender policy, the Taiping never have a reason to surrender. You're going to die either way. You might as well die fighting back. This leads to terrible slaughters on both sides and no reason for either side to ever surrender. In 1858, Taiping gets some fresh victories and boosting of morale, but things are still not looking that great in Nanjing because of just how bad things were after the king split up and all those people died. Again, the dream of the Heavenly Kingdom seems to have smashed into reality pretty hard. After these victories, a 200,000 person army is sent from Beijing. They are all dressed in green. And if you're on the city walls, Nanjing has a gigantic wall. And if you're on the city walls, it's like 47 miles long, you would just see the hills covered in soldiers of green. In the middle of winter, the hills would look green with how many soldiers they were. They called themselves the Green Standard Army. And this was not a basic army. This was not the weak local armies they've been up against up until now. These guys were good, and they knew what they were doing. On the other side was Nanjing. They had 20,000 men still inside. Between all the fighting and rebellions and the Beijing army and all this stuff, things were not looking very well. This was not the same army that had been working together all those years. They had really suffered, and this just wasn't a good time in the rebellion. And this is one of those moments where it really looks like the rebellion might be over. The Evergreen army begins a siege, and they completely outnumber them. And this looks like it should be kind of the end of the story. But just as we've seen from episode 1, part 1, if you remember, where it just looked like it was over and suddenly they survive, that's what happens. The Nanjing 20,000 people kind of come together. They begin doing guerrilla warfare tactics and divide and control tactics, and they keep the 200,000 men from being able to completely squeeze them out. On top of that, they had some armies on the outside that kind of come around in to help cut off the supplies to the Evergreen army. So now the Evergreen army is sieging Nanjing, but on the outside, the Taiping Rebellion has some armies outside sieging them. So both sides are fighting. However, the Evergreen army, these Hills of Green people, are good soldiers. They don't get thrown off. They stay the course. They are committed to defeating the Nanjing army. They're veterans, and they know how to do it. The soldiers holding the city are in a really tough spot. And all day long, there's a 45-mile wall that 45-mile long wall. I said 47, 45, that they have to keep guarded at all times, always ready for this 200,000 army to just break in and start attacking. And they have to do this with 1/10 of the number of soldiers. During this time, Xiuquan sees how bad things are, and he famously comes out and teaches the guards new hymns. I got some new hymns to encourage you from God. And they don't really sing them. As I told you before, they chant these hymns. Now, remember, he was trained by a Western Baptist preacher guy. And so imagine, these armies are just going up and down a wall, and they're probably singing a song like Amazing Grace, but they're probably chanting it. And that's kind of the situation you're in. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, is what the soldiers are saying while they patrol back and forth, because their king came out of his concubine palace to his harem to teach them these songs. How great thou art. Just what a creepy, weird thing this is going on the walls of this kingdom at this time. Chanting that, hoping, and he tells them, if we chant these hymns, if we really do it and trust in God, he will save us. Well, they realized that their plan of the outside army attacking on one side and their inside army wasn't working, so they try something very brave. They decide to throw open the gates and charge them. One army attacking from one side and one army attacking from the other. This is probably your boldest, most dangerous move you can make. If you fail, your army is gone, and the Green Standard Army can just march right in. But they set up a thing. They have signals. They signal the outside army, on this day we're going to attack, and we're going to see what happens. At night, they signal their armies. Both armies throw open the gates, and they attack. Well, it just so happened that same day, a snowstorm completely blew in on the Green Standard Army. These veteran soldiers were completely unexpecting this blizzard, and so they were trying to set up their supply lines, their communication lines, and in one of the only times we see this, the Taiping Rebellion actually mounts horses. They have 20,000 soldiers on horses, flood out of the city, and they start attacking the Green Standard Bearer, and their outside army attacks at the same time. The snowstorm had already thrown them off. By the time communication lines are open, they realize they're wide open to attack and that they've been getting destroyed. And when it's all said and done, 50,000 of the Green Standard Bearer armies just take off running. They get killed in the fleeing. And when this is almost over, almost the entire army is destroyed. From the wall, the soldiers say they could just see what was once hills covered in green are now just hills covered in red with blood from all the fighting. In fact, some of the nearby rivers are completely destroyed because so many soldiers had been killed and fell into them that the rivers are completely useless. They're literally just corrupted with the blood and bodies of these people. And what was once a hill of green soldiers are now just piles of bodies everywhere. Now, the commander of the Green Standard Bearer, this guy sent by the Qing to destroy the Taiping Rebellion, when he sees how bad their defeat was, he kills himself. He says, I can't survive this. I'm done. And this situation goes back to the Qing court. The Qing had just lost the Second Opium War. They see the Taiping destroyed one of their veteran elite forces, and they begin to change strategies. This is in the year 1860. They've already been humiliated by the outside, and now they're being embarrassed by the inside. And so they begin to appoint people not based on family or connections, but they appoint somebody based on merit. If you remember in the first episode, I told you the Qing Empire, bases things on what family did you come from. That's not a good way to win a war. And when they see their veteran, strong force take down, they say, okay, we're going to get somebody who's good at what he does to come in here and take on the Taiping Rebellion. And they hire a guy to do the job named Zheng Guofan. Now, I got to tell you, Zheng Guofan, if I was writing a movie or creating a TV series, and I wanted to pick the perfect guy to rival our guy, Hong Xiuquan, Zheng Guofan is that guy. He is literally like, he's the foil. He is the David to our guy Saul. It is the perfect guy. Let me explain. Our guy, Hong Xiuquan, he became famous by rallying people together and fighting the bandits and the chaos down in South China. Well, Zheng Guofan became famous for a very similar reason. He would gather armies together to fight against the chaos caused by the Taiping Rebellion. These armies and all the overflow there, he made his marks by fighting against our guy. Zheng Guofan is the Moriarty to his Sherlock Holmes. Hong Xiuquan, he had his first mental breakdown because he failed the civil service exams. Zheng Guofan passed his civil service exams at the top of his class. Xiuquan got his early start attacking bandits and villages. Zheng Guofan got his start bringing peace against the Taiping Rebellion. Zheng Guofan, just like Hong Xiuquan, was not originally a soldier. He was brought into it to stop the Taiping Rebellion. And when they invaded his province, he threw them out. He brought people together to rebel against the Taiping army in the same way that Xiuquan had brought people together to rebel against the Qing Empire. Unlike Hong, who built up a force around himself, Zheng decided to join the Qing army for protection. He recognized there were problems in the Qing army, but we can fix it. We can make it better from the inside out. He would hire, for example, at the time, they would move officers around to keep you from being loyal to one officer. Well, Zheng Guofan was able to convince them, no, let them become allied and loyal to a certain officer so they'll fight harder for him. Zheng Guofan said there is a problem in the Qing Empire. And just like Xiuquan, our main guy, he says it is a problem of religion. But unlike Xiuquan, he says it's not that we have visions and mystical things. We need to go back to Confucian teaching. He began to rally people around and teach them Confucius teachings, and basically was like, hey, if we were disciplined like Confucius teaches us, we would be strong as an empire. Our problem is religion, but he's trying to turn them back to the old ways. Again, on paper, Guofan is the antithesis. He is the everything opposite of Xiuquan. And like I said, if this was a movie, he would be the perfect villain. He's the cop chasing the bandit, and he's in every way the opposite of our guy, but yet very similar. They both agree it's a problem of religion, but Xiuquan is trying to build this Christian light kingdom, and Guofan is trying to get them to return to the discipline of their ancestors. That will be what fixes it. And the new system that Guofan puts into place from a military perspective works really well. And the Qing look at what he's doing, and they basically put him in charge of everything and say, you're in charge of the future military. You seem to know what you're doing, and we're going to put you in charge of the Taiping army. You fought against them before. You're good at fighting back against them. Use your skills to take them on. And Zheng Guofan is sent down to lead an army against the Nanjing city. He's put in charge of all of this. And it's crazy because it feels like a movie, but go look it up, Google it. You can learn about this guy. He has a long history. All of these things are true. From the Qing perspective, he's the hero. He's the guy who's gonna rise up and take on these bad invader bandits. Now, the Qing made him the leader of their military, hoping that this guy raised on merit might be able to do the job. But they also turned to the outside world. Remember, I said the Second Opium War was part of the reason they were losing, but then it will become part of the reason they're winning. They turn to the outside world and they go, hey, European nations, you guys have been neutral to the Taiping Rebellion up until now, but come on. We just gave you all these treaties and ports and trade deals, but what good do those do you if we fall apart and the Taiping take over? And the European nations kind of wanted the Qing Empire to win. The Taiping Rebellion was in the way of their trade, was in the way of the merchants, and they were causing problems on the canals and networks. You can't make any money out of China while this rebellion is going on. And The Europeans wanted the Chinese to be addicted to opium so they could keep selling them opium, but the Taiping wouldn't allow you to do drugs. That sounds bad because you go, oh, come on, Christian Britain, France, are you guys really going to throw in again with the Buddhist Confucian Empire for money? Yeah, that's exactly what they do. And the Westerners send their weapons and help now to the Qing Empire. One example was an American named Frederick Townsend Ward. He would start a group called the Soldiers of Fortune, a mercenary military group. This group were just volunteers that lived in Shanghai. They lived in that area. And they kind of gathered together to fight against the Taiping Rebellion. It was originally 200 Europeans who, for different reasons, were living already in Shanghai. Some of them were adventurers. Some of them were deserters who had escaped other wars. Some of them were just sailors. But when the Taiping came, they all kind of gathered together and began fighting to protect Shanghai. And even though there weren't many of them, they were actually pretty strong. Over time, they began to add Chinese soldiers and train them in European military tactics. And this became like a special force of 3,000 soldiers that could be counted on to show up in Shanghai and fight whenever they were needed. They had very strong early victories against bad odds, and the Qing gave them their own name, even though they called themselves the Soldiers of Fortune. The name that the Qing gave them was the, quote, ever victorious army. Although it stayed always pretty much in the Shanghai area, Shanghai, same place, it existed at its time at about a height of 5,000 soldiers at its biggest, and it became the first Western trained force of Chinese soldiers, and that made a huge difference. They were using Western tactics against the Taiping army, and the Taiping army had never seen Western tactics, had never seen that kind of training, and it absolutely demolished them. They would often hold positions that were heavily outnumbered and attacked, but they would manage to do a really good job. We'll talk more about their role here a little bit sooner when we get more to the invasion of Shanghai. But for now, you can just see how things like this are beginning to help turn the favor in the Qing Empire. They're learning from their mistakes and they're getting better. Even though the Grand Canal is still blocked off to Beijing, it doesn't really matter because Beijing has all these new ports with foreign empires trading with them. It's not that they don't need the Grand Canal, but they're not starving. They'll make it work. During this time, one of Hong's cousins, a man named Rungan, shows up. He had actually come during the siege of Nanjing, during the Evergreen Standard Bearer siege. It was a sign of loyalty and trust to make such a dangerous attempt to break through the siege to get to his cousin. And he joins to help the movement. And he says, hey, I know what the Taiping Rebellion needs. We need a seaport. The Qing Empire has seaports. They have access to the West. We own many cities, but we don't own a seaport. We need to buy ships. We need to get contact with the Western world so we can get trade and weapons. And if they know about us, they know about this Christian kingdom here in China, they will want to join us. And this makes a lot of sense. Hong Xiuquan, he loves the idea. And so he sends some of his generals and says, go take Shanghai, make that our seaport, and let's begin trading with the West so that they want us to win. Now, Shanghai today is one of the biggest cities in the world. And if you think of China, Beijing and Shanghai are kind of two of the probably first cities you think of. But at the time, Shanghai was not really that big a deal. I've been to Shanghai. It's absolutely beautiful. Many people consider it the jewel of China because of just how skyscrapers. It's a pretty place. I do remember almost getting pickpocketed there, but we managed to pull it off that we didn't. But it's not always perfect. But hey, it's a nice place overall. But back then, Shanghai wasn't that important. In fact, the Taiping Rebellion is kind of part of the reason it becomes such an important place. As people fled out of the Taiping Rebellion, they began to plant themselves into the nearest seaport that wasn't controlled by them. And that happened to be Shanghai. And so as the population of Shanghai gets all these refugees fleeing the Taiping Rebellion, and as it becomes kind of the country line, where will we let Shanghai be captured or not, that ends up making it a really important place. And all these foreigners begin to flood in there. Part of the reason why Shanghai is a big city today is because of this rebellion. Now, the Taiping Rebellion said, hey, we think taking Shanghai will be really easy. It's right next to a city called Suzhou and another city called Hangzhou. Both of those are great places to get more people for our cause because there are already Christians present in both of those places. And it's true. When the army arrived in Suzhou, which is a town filled with canals and boats, Suzhou didn't even fight back. They didn't have to fire a single shot. They basically handed them the keys and said, Suzhou's yours, Taiping Rebellion, don't fight us, don't kill us, we're fine. After that, they took a city called Hangzhou. I lived there for a year, and if you've ever seen a Chinese yuan or their dollar, on the back is a picture of a lake, and that lake is located in Hangzhou. It's on the back of every piece of Chinese money. It's a beautiful lake. You could walk around it for hours, and there are just old buildings and temples. Hangzhou, and back in ancient China, was the capital of China back in the olden days. And in actuality, Hangzhou is sometimes, not very often, but sometimes it used to be called the Jerusalem of Christianity in China, because so many Christians had lived in Hangzhou throughout the years. Back in the ancient 6th and 7th century, there were Christians that had been recorded as having been there. And when when missionaries started to come into China again, Hangzhou was one of the very first places they began to open the door. In the 6th and 17th centuries, Jesuits had arrived in China, and they were trying to bring Chinese people into Christianity, and they found that they were able to do so. And this was all discovered in like the 1980s. We didn't actually know about this until 30 years ago, how they did this. But they planted Catholic churches in Hangzhou, and by 1611, they found that Hangzhou was especially open to Christianity. And one of the reasons was a Confucian teacher who lived there. Now, again, you probably don't know that much about Hangzhou, but Hangzhou back in the day was like a Rome or Athens. I mean, it was a big deal in the ancient world. And when Jesuits arrived there, they would tell them about the faith. And there was this one Confucian teacher who specifically said, hey, I think your faith reminds me of this great God in the sky. He reminds me of our old God called Shangdi, which is interesting to me. It's the same thing. If you remember the first episode, I said that Hong Xiuquan compared Christianity to the older faith, Shangdi. And so this Confucian teacher wrote a book called Similarities. And he said basically Christianity is similar to what we used to believe. It's the true faith. It's the real faith. Let's go back to that. Now, in Chinese culture, you lose face. You are embarrassed if you admit you are wrong. But so if you say, oh, our religion is wrong, we've been worshiping the wrong gods, that is embarrassing. You lose face, and people won't convert to Christianity because of that. But if you go, oh, I'm not wrong, I'm returning to the original faith of my ancestors, that's not such a big deal. Around the same time that these Catholics had begun to insert themselves into Hangzhou, they also found way out in the western part of China, it's called the Xian Stele. It's an old, basically brick that has like records written around it. These steles are around the world, have been discovered, and you can go look it up. But they get discovered sometimes, and it talked about Christianity in China. So as these Jesuits were telling people in Hangzhou about Christianity, we had at the same time evidence that Christianity had been in China in the same years being found, this Confucian. And so it really took off in Suzhou and Hangzhou that people were open to Christianity. And so when the Taiping Rebellion stepped in, the people of Hangzhou and Suzhou were more open to Christianity than other parts of China, and they were able to do a good job. Taiping was able to take Hangzhou, which is full of tea plantations, rice fields, full of a great way to sustain your army. Everything's going really well, and now they're poised. They're right at the mouth of a giant river. They go upriver. There's Shanghai waiting for them. Everything's looking good, and then something goes weird. The general who's supposed to take Shanghai, it is thought that he could raise 200,000 men to surround Shanghai with. This would be easily able to take Shanghai, but he doesn't. Instead, he sends 3,000 men to the walls of Shanghai with a message. And the message says basically, we actually have this message. You can go look it up. It's a real record we have, but it's an apology. And he goes up to the gates of Shanghai, and he doesn't attack the city. He says, I want to apologize. Our armies, while we were invading the region, we accidentally killed 4 foreigners and harmed some members at a local church. We are Christians, and we didn't mean to kill the Christians here to share the gospel. It was a total accident. We executed the men that did it. Please accept our sincere apology. This is a civil war. It's been going on for a while. We did not mean to do this. And they tell the foreigners, please accept our apology. Shanghai, we're going to come back, but we didn't mean to do it, okay? Now, up until now, every foreigner they've kind of met, every European they've come across were Christians and had kind of been somewhat supportive of this movement. And so they said, if you're a foreigner, please wave a yellow flag from your house. If there's a Christian church, Shanghai, wave a yellow flag from your house. We won't attack places with yellow flags. We're not here to kill Christians. Seems reasonable, right? Well, these foreigners are those soldiers of fortune that we had talked about, and they do not care about the Taiping Rebellion. For them, this is interrupting trade and commerce, and they look at them and basically say, we don't care about your Christian kingdom. We have no interest in that. And the Taiping Rebellion is confused. Every time foreigners and Europeans are synonymous with Christians in their eyes. And they go, don't you understand? We're building a Christian kingdom. And these traders go, we don't. That means nothing to us. And as the 3,000 person group comes to Shanghai to deliver the message, they get the open fire on them by this group. The ever victorious army, the soldiers of fortune, begin killing them. But the general forces the 3,000 soldiers to march forward anyway with the message. At one point, they kind of wave at the foreigners like, we're Christians like you, and they don't care. The Europeans are just mowing them down. And despite the heavy firepower, the Taiping are ordered not to shoot back. Hundreds of people die in this march to the death. And at one point, they even give the Europeans time to set up extra guns to fire on them. It's an insane thing. But the Taiping Rebellion refuses to attack these Europeans. They really think that the Europeans will be on their side, and their whole strategy right now is if we can get a seaport to Shanghai, the Europeans will join us and create a Christian kingdom. But the Europeans are not interested in a Christian kingdom. These guys are interrupting the very powerful and very wealthy opium trade, and they don't care about the Taiping Rebellion. These people are seen as a way to hurt their pocketbooks. What's crazy, too, is that in a lot of ways, if the Taiping Rebellion had been successful, yeah, their king was obsessed with concubines, but it really would have probably modernized China in parts of what the cousin, Rungan, who was like, hey, listen to my plan, let's build a seaport. He had a bunch of plans that he shared with Xiuquan. He wanted to make China a democracy. He wanted to westernize it. His cousin, Rungan, had spent a lot of time with Westerners, and he could speak English and their language, and he understood what they wanted. He wanted to make he saw that the Qing was never going to westernize, but he believed that they could set it up, they could build schools, democracy, and create a great country. The irony is, like, what the Taiping Rebellion under Rungan would have done was become exactly like the European powers, and now they're showing up in front of Europeans and they're getting mowed down. And it's now the Europeans who are turning on this movement, and not just Europeans, Americans too. The Western world is saying, we don't want the Taiping Rebellion. We don't want your Christian kingdom because we're making more money with the other side. They begin to spread these rumors and stories in the foreign newspapers of North China saying basically the Taiping Rebellion is this wild slaughter of people and that you better watch out. They're killing anybody. They're not the Christian kings we've heard they are. Be scared of them. They're sharing all these rumors and creating a moral cause to destroy them. And the Europeans are showing they're not going to side with them anymore. This battle over Shanghai, for whatever reason, the general never sends the full force against Shanghai. I don't know if he's worried that if I accidentally kill a couple foreigners, I'll start a third opium war or what. But he had tens of thousands of soldiers, but he just keeps sending these small little forces that the soldiers of fortune are able to fight off pretty well. It's one of the bizarre things in this war that doesn't make any sense. At one point, the general that's fighting for the Taiping Rebellion, told to capture Shanghai, is able to access 600,000 soldiers, 500,000 soldiers, more than enough to take it, but he never does. They don't want to destroy the city. They don't want to cause problems with the foreigners and bring France and Britain against them, and so they just kind of get stuck taking little parts of the city and never fully being able to defend them. The other problem they're having is the Qing Empire is now sending a more skillful army. This is the one that's led by Zheng Guofan. They have a navy again, and they begin to invade through Suzhou and cut this army to fight Shanghai off and away from the Taiping supply lines. And they begin to come down and deal with the Taiping Rebellion in a very serious and real way. The ever victorious army, those soldiers of fortune, they're helping them conquer back too, and they're fighting back. But the Qing never really trusted them to do the job because they were foreigners, and who knows, these guys are mercenaries, they'll actually take things seriously. But during this time, these groups take up Suzhou, they take Hangzhou back, they surround this army that's trying to take Shanghai, and eventually they're cut off. And at the same time, the Qing Empire tells the British and French, don't sell weapons to the Taiping, so now the Taiping aren't getting weapons from the European powers anymore. The Taiping people really put all of their hope in this outside power coming in to save them, but it just doesn't seem like that's going to happen. Now, they do have one more strategy to get the outside world on their side, though. They're going to reach out directly to the Christians. In 1860...
Okay, I was literally just about to ask what year we're in. We're in 1860, right?
1860.
Okay, and things are starting to not look too hot.
No, they've lost that they've lost that army up north. They're losing their invasion of Shanghai. They've lost soldiers in their own inner splitting. Things are starting to come apart for them.
Yeah, it seems like both from within their general isn't too hot about continuing their cause, and multiple fronts on the from outside that
From
are
the
pushing
outside,
in.
yeah.
From the outside. Okay, all
That's
right.
exactly what's happening. But they do have this kind of window, one more way to bring the Western world on their side. They're not bringing them in through the seaport plan. That's kind of fizzling out. But they have one other plan, and that is through just direct Christian outreach. We're a Christian kingdom, right? Let's bring you in. And this actually gives us a lot of insight. We get the most insight to what it was like to be, quote unquote, a Christian in this kingdom through what they try next. In the year 1860, Reverend Issachar Roberts leaves South China and travels up to Nanjing. Now, Joel, if you remember, I told you there was a guy, he was a pastor, he tried to disciple Hong Xiuquan, but it fails, and Hong Xiuquan goes off. And I said that was like the last exit ramp from Crazy Town. Well, that's the same guy. He has seen for 10 years what's going on. He feels responsible for what's happening. And so he chooses to go up there and see if he can help him. He goes up to the city of Nanjing, and Xiuquan is excited to see him. He hasn't seen him in 8 or 9 years, but he's like, hey, this is my old teacher, this is my mentor, bring him in, I want to see him. And up until this point, Issachar Roberts has been writing books and newspapers celebrating what they're doing. He said, hey, this is a great guy. I may not have gotten to baptize him, but here's a quote from him. He says, had he gained his civil service exam degree to become a mandarin under the ruler, that would have been his highest aim. If I had baptized him to become an assistant preacher, who knows where he'd be right now, but look at how different his position is now to spread the gospel. And another, as Baptist missionary, he's seeing him do so much, he's thinking, this is great. He said in another pamphlet in 1854, again, before he gets there, he says, quote, the Qing dynasty will become defunct and the Taiping dynasty will be established. The Christian religion will not only be tolerated, but now promoted in China. And if you've been a missionary in China for decades and you know how hard it is to share the gospel with the Qing Empire stopping you, this looks like a beautiful thing. He's very excited to get up to Nanjing and see what his old student's been doing. He can't wait to help out. But when he gets there, he realizes the Christian kingdom is not what he thought it was. Westerners, they kind of come and go a little bit here and there, but they basically were surprised to find that the peasants and former scholars were basically acting like the Qing Empire. They were just dressing up in their clothes and putting on even more parades and putting on even more extravagant shows. Foreigners had complained, Westerners had complained and said, China's full of all these pomp and circumstance and all this respect and honor show stuff that gets in the way of doing anything. Well, now the Taiping Rebellion is doing even more exaggerated versions of all that power showmanship, but run by peasants who don't know what they're doing. So it's even more incompetent and even more of a mess than it was before. Now, Rungan, the cousin who knows the West really well, he basically is trying to convince Issachar, like, let's get the Christians on board. Let's do this thing. He thinks that he can kind of convince him and leave him in there. And one of the ways he does this is he goes, hey, let's be nice to the foreigners and not attack them directly. At one point, Zheng Gofan, remember the rival of Hong Xiuquan, has got a big army. He's almost completely surrounded, but because he hides basically in a part of Shanghai where the foreigners are, they don't attack him, and he's able to recover his soldiers and army and live to fight another day. Zheng Gofan was saved by this strategy of don't attack the foreigner that Rungan had been doing. Now, Issachar Roberts does one more thing. This is their other window of chance. They bring a group of Baptist missionaries and adventurers to Nanjing to show them the Christian kingdom, to kind of, let's put a big foot forward. If they tell all of the Christian newspapers and publishers and books that everything's going great in China, maybe the Christian world will come on their side and Europe will be forced to take the Taiping Rebellion side. This is their Hail Mary. This is kind of their last chance to convince the world, join us, Christians. And so we get all these outsider Christian perspectives that they wrote down journals. I actually read through the journal, not all of it, but a lot of it, and it was really interesting. Rungan, when he's doing this, by the way, he's been demoted. His plan to get the West on the side, Shanghai, all of that had gone so poorly that he's demoted basically now to tour guide. This is his last thing. Xiuquan's given, he's his cousin, so he can't completely get rid of him, but this is your last job. If these missionaries that come and visit the Taiping Rebellion aren't happy, you're toast. We're done with the Westerner policy after that. And the Westerners are not impressed. They see the city in terms of a disaster. People with no property ownership, no governance, pomp and circumstance, constant displays of power, a leader who spends all day with concubines, violence everywhere. They heard all of the cities the Taiping had destroyed and the wars they had been fighting, how many people dying. They're terrified. They're going, oh, millions of people are dying because of this war. Why are you doing this? They would see piles of skulls on the street and they say, this is where we killed the people who broke the laws. And they're going, what are you doing? That's not what Christians do. We don't kill everybody who breaks the laws. What's wrong with you? The missionaries told Rungan that the theology of this place too is a mess. Now, I read some of these letters back and forth, and even before they got to Nanjing, they were having a terrible time. The mission trip to China had led to one of the leaders' wives dying due to illness on a boat. It was a mess. So when they got there, they were already kind of in a bad place, and seeing the state of things did not make things better. Let me read some of the quotes from their story here. While the daylight lasts, before tea, I will give you a short account of our walk. It is sorrowful to see the perfect desolation all around. Houses burnt to the ground, stones scattered in endless confusion, mingled with tiles and mortar, a melancholy sight. Scarcely a house bounding the river is entire, all of it in ruins for miles. We passed up and through the silent streets, and instead of busy activity, the lonely barking of dogs and the echo of our footsteps resounded. The bridge, once lined with busy passerbyers, is now desolated, the tall weeds rendering the steps difficult to walk, the closely shuttered windows showing that no inmate was within, the barricaded door and sometimes the doorless houses and the windowless houses met our gaze. Busy shops and tea shops where the laugh and the gestures were once heard are all silent. A shop or two here and there were open, but we seemed to be nearly the only people on foot, and instead of jostling to get along, we had to scramble through the weeds where once busy activities had remained. All these are the sad results of this war. Another quote, oh, that China would be freed from it. This is and ought to be our daily prayer. The extent of the desolation no words or pen can describe, and who can tell what no eye but one saw. The extent of heartfelt misery that each family, each individual has suffered, who once were happy, they are now prisoners of these devastated houses. How soothing the thought that He, our Heavenly Father, knows all this pain and sees it. And even though their hearts were unenlightened by the truths of the Bible still, may we not hope that some alleviation to their suffering will be granted to them? All is wisely ordered before His eyes. He knows what is best as we gaze upon these scenes. This is not what you want the people coming to rally people to your cause to be saying about your cause, right? It's important to note that in some ways, missionaries are the worst people you could bring to your war zone. Missionaries just naturally have, Joel, you work with missionaries, you're a missions videographer. They have a natural love for people. They hate to see people hurting. And so if you're showing them a war zone, trying to convince the world, join our side, they're going to look and see all the devastation, the hurting people, the dying people, and they're going to go, this needs to end, right? Joel, would you kind of agree that's what you think would happen?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, so this is, in some ways, like, it makes sense that they thought, oh, these missionaries will tell all the Christians to join our side. But the missionaries are going, oh my goodness, what are you guys doing? This is a disaster. In the middle of this, they also got the chance to have theological debates back and forth with their leaders. And you can see, I've got a few examples here where you can just tell their Christianity is not our Christianity. Here's one I saw. I asked him if he really believed the Heavenly Father came down into the person who called himself Yang once the Eastern King. And the man said, yes, I saw him myself when it took place and others were there. And I asked him, you do not suppose that the Heavenly Father appeared in any other way or spoke by any other person? No, he said. He spoke only through the lips of the Eastern King, the one who was the voice of God, who fell into the trance. Yeah, how do you also believe in the visions of this other guy? Yes, I do. And many other people saw at the time those visions. His mother and two brothers, his sister, they all saw the state they were in, the meditation. It was not his body that went through him, but heaven and his soul. Which do you consider the most important, the visions of the person you saw or the death of Jesus Christ? Both are important, but I suppose you would say that the death of Jesus Christ is more important. Yes, the visions of the guy you saw are new, and we cannot examine the evidence for ourselves, but we know, respecting Jesus is old and well established in the truth, there is abundant proof for him. And the person answers, I must call on this other guy to defend our doctrine. I am not myself capable to do so, but I have this to say, that your books, and speaking of things that happened 18 centuries ago, they will be thrown aside by our people as recording what is ancient and less interesting, while our books relate to them what is fresh and contain scenes and names and things that they understand in their language. During further conversations with him and his friend, I learned that they have never had among them, properly speaking, once a communion of the Lord's Supper. Their acquaintance with the scriptures, as they are well aware of what it means, but the chief of it has not been understood by them. They practice baptism by washing the head and chest with water, but they don't do baptism the way we do. I asked them what they understood by the Holy Spirit. In answer, they asked, who is he supposed to be? When informed that he is equal with the Father and the Son and called God, different in order but the same in nature and power, they stated that their friend taught them the Holy Spirit was actually just another name for the Father. Here's another conversation they have. We said, I asked them, whose merits is believing a man forgiven? They said, through the merits of Christ. I said, what makes the Christ of death effectual? He was without sin. We are sinners and can atone for our sin. And I would hear that and we would agree. What were your feelings as you read the 10 Commandments of God? And they said, I thought this is the doctrine that's true. When I came to the word, don't steal, do not commit adultery, I felt indignant at those who committed those crimes, and that is why we have been killing them. And then I asked them, is it not right to indulge our passions and commit deeds of violence, such as taking the lives of men? Jesus, when he was reviled, said, don't revile again. When he suffered, he didn't threaten. We must imitate the divine forbearance of our example. In other words, you agree with the 10 Commandments are true. You agree that Jesus is what makes you perfect. So why are you killing people when they break the rules? And they said, yes, if your enemy strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other. And she says, you appear to have read the scriptures. What fault did Paul find with the Galatians in his letter to them? They listened to the instructions of false teachers. How is a man justified before God? By knowing himself to be sinful. But for whose sake is he forgiven? For the sake of Jesus. Here, an older rebel began to talk to their friend and asked a few questions. And I asked them, what other books have you read on Christianity? And they said, well, village sermons by this Chinese pastor and others. How were you occupied with the time? I was engaged on a boat at the time while we read them. Do you live as a Christian after reading these books? Yes, I always go to church on Sunday. Well, actually, they didn't go to church on Sunday. They actually went to church on Saturday, but that's a different story. How did you come to Nanking? In pursuit of my occupation, I was brought here, and so I joined the army. Why did you not, like the others, run away? I asked the soldiers whose people they were, and they said, we worship Shangti, the ancient god, and that he forbids opium and wine. I thought this sounds like a good one to follow, and so I did. Very few of these men, this woman now is writing, this missionary we're following is a woman, by the way. She writes down, very few of these men have I found among them were actually believers. Their presence cannot be held to have that powerful influence. Far from it. A few possess the light and may know Christ, but even in those who know it, there is a darkness, and it fails to allow them to show that love to others. War is carried on between the rebels and the Qing Empire, has caused the destruction of so many lives and so much property. Invading hordes desolate the area. The Christian foreigner cannot be without sympathy to the movement because we know what enormous crime has been committed against them and against Christians, but he will also not fail to note that these people do not understand the scriptures that they are studying, and they do not believe in the same doctrines in many ways of our own religion. Finally, as she was kind of leaving, she says, a few days' residence in the southern part of Nanking, its present circumstances as a place to live, are far from agreeable and healthy. There is no free access of laborers to work in the city. The well water is poisoned by nauseous matter. We noticed that our Chinese companions took in the morning a large basin of medicine as a precautionary to drinking their own water. To ask them what this was, they said it was just a tea with hot water mixed in, and they would take these and other drugs to make sure they could drink their own water. This was to counteract the sickness of the water that they had. In the evening before we left, our brothers, he had been retained from work as a Taiping. We ran into him, and we knew that he was trying to hide out from basically, I'll just kind of summarize the story from her journal, but she basically says there was a man who was trying to sneak in among them, sneak out from the city as she's leaving, and they basically hide him so that he can escape. He hasn't been able to see his family in weeks. He's basically being held hostage there, and even though they risked their own lives, they helped this guy kind of secretly sneak out without getting caught. Even though these people read the Bible, she says later on, they just don't understand Christianity. The Taiping chiefs make it terrible examples to their followers. They kill everyone who disagrees with them or causes problems. And so the people of the Taiping are honestly under slavery more than anything else. This is the account that the missionaries that were supposed to rally everyone to their cause give of the city. And this is really where we get, outside of Hong Xiuquan's own writings, this is where we get our best understanding of the day-to-day theology. They're not convinced. They met Hong Xiuquan. They didn't like what they found. They talked with the people about theology. They didn't understand Christianity. And you can tell that this was not going to bring the Westerners over. Runga knew Xiuquan would not change the theology. The Westerners said, like, can we mentor him? Can we work with him? No, Xiuquan was not going to be talked to anybody. He would let his friend Roberts talk with him. But even by 1862, he basically, Roberts leaves. Issachar Roberts, the Reverend, he's either kicked out and almost gets killed by the cousin who's threatening to murder him and murder some of his servants. That's what Issachar Roberts says. Issachar Roberts says, I was chased out. Rungan was losing his position, so he tries to murder me. He kills some of my servants working for me and chases me out of the city, and I only got out by hiding on the side of a boat. That's Issachar Roberts' version. Rungan's version is, no, he just got tired of things and left. Either way, in 1862, the old mentor is gone, and that's the end of missionaries and Westerners really coming to the Taiping Rebellion. That's pretty much the end of that. It did not work out. Issachar Roberts will leave Nanjing and go back to where he was in Macau for a few more years, and then he will head back home. He's had leprosy since he worked with lepers decades ago, and he will die of leprosy in 1871, but he did live a pretty full life for a guy who caught leprosy like in his early years. With Roberts gone, with Rungun failing to convince the missionaries, with the seaport to Shanghai now gone, the dream of the Western countries coming to save the Taiping people was over. There would not be a great missionary alliance with Christianity. It's not the same Christianity. Whatever it is, it's not the same. There was one other Westerner who famously went there, a Lindley F. Augustus, who actually joined the army. Him and his wife, a Portuguese woman he had met in Macau, they fought and were against the Qing Empire, and they would fight together. However, they would fight against that soldiers of fortune, ever victorious army. They called themselves the Loyal and Faithful Auxiliary Legion. They steal a steamboat from the army in Shanghai, but at some point, as he's going through the ranks, his wife dies in a battle in Suzhou, and after that, he heads back to England. He will write a pro-Taiping Rebellion book, but when the people from the Soldiers of Fortune group go back to England, they will attack him and basically be like, you're crazy, the Taiping Rebellion was awful, and so there'll be this back and forth book writing war that go on between them. Suzhou goes to the ever-victorious army, and the generals are tightening that noose around the neck of the Taiping Rebellion, and it's looking like they're not going to get the help that they need. Now, eventually, we will see kind of the end results of these things kind of coming together. The West will basically say, by the way, this ever-victorious army, soldiers of fortune, they really play out the story and say, like, these guys really trained the Chinese how to fight. The Chinese will kind of put that story down, like, oh, they were just a side army, a side project. The Qing Empire had this, no worries. The West didn't really do that much. It's not that, it's not that big a deal. Don't make them too much. It's debated whether that little army was as effective as the story says it was, but at least in the European side, they definitely were like, no, that group was a big deal. The West tends to see themselves as the heroes, and the Chinese are like, no, we had it. No worries. All right. This time, Hong Xiuquan's cousin is basically demoted completely out of leadership. His plan failed. It's too bad because, as I said, I think his ideas of westernizing democracy, of schools, of hospitals, of trade, all of that would have been really great. If China had allowed that cousin to run the show, I think China would have been in really good shape, but they didn't. Now, one of the generals, a man named General Li, who we will come up with again in the story, he was asked, why does their Christianity look so different? And the missionaries, and he says, look, quote, you Europeans have had the gospel for upwards of 1,800 years. We have only had it like 8 days compared to you. Your knowledge of it ought to be correct and extensive. Ours is necessarily limited. We've been under war the entire time we've had it. You must therefore be patient with us as we gradually improve. As for the gospel, it is one that must be propagated throughout the world. Let our foreign brethren all know that we are determined to uproot the idolatry of China and plant a Christianity in its place. And when I read quotes like that, I just go, man, they don't, as bad as they are, there are moments when you kind of sympathize with them, right? Like you go, man, you guys, you've got a lot of stuff wrong, but it would have been cool if some aspects of this had worked out. But I know that it's just a mess. All right. So there's some truth to this, though. Anytime you see missionaries working in new lands and customs with people who had never known Christ, it is never smooth. It is always messy. Look at David Livingstone's work in Africa. Look at anywhere where Christianity enters a field where it hasn't been before, and it's going to be really, really messy. Even look at Europe's history. Charlemagne and some of those guys, they brought Christianity in a sense, but it wasn't the clean Christianity we're used to today. And so they're making the case like, look, if you give us time, we'll get better. We've been under war the whole time we've been doing this. We're doing the best we can. If you were a citizen of Nanjing or the Taiping lands, you started your day with a morning service. You would read a morning prayer. The women and men would be separate. Remember, they split the whole city in half, men on one side, women on the other. You would then pray a prayer of supplication. You would chant anthems. You would read the doxology. You would sing a hymn. The minister of the service would read a morning prayer, and then he would throw it in the fire after he read it. I don't know why. Drums at the palace would tell everyone it's time for morning meal. The families would be allowed to come together to have their meals. The father would pray the same prayer in every house at the same time. Heavenly Father, the great God, bless us, your little ones. Give us day by day our food to eat and clothes to wear. Deliver us from evil and calamity, and receive our souls into heaven. Now, they came to church on Saturday. They accidentally messed up their calendar when they should have done it on Sunday. And so they would sing their hymns, but they would go to church and they would sing their hymns. They would read the Bible. They would pray. And they really emphasized the Old Testament, not the New. And they would do a sacrifice, food, meat, rice, whatever. And they would say, God, take the sacrifice as something we can give to you. And they would pour it out in front of the temple altar, whatever they had, to God of the Bible, they would say. And Hong Xiuquan was really impressed with the Christian missionaries' use of books and tracts, and so they were constantly publishing books, despite the fact they were in the middle of a war zone. They created several books, and they were encouraging people to learn to read so they could read and grow in their faith. Although China had a practice of arranged marriages up until this point in the Taiping Rebellion, if you wanted to get married, it was done because you were in love. You'd go to the minister, he would examine you, he would ask you theological questions, he'd make sure you were doing it for the right reasons, and if he thought you had good reasons to be married, he'd hold your hands together and he would announce you married. And that was it. You were married from that point on. There was no procedure for divorce. Now, it was not only legal, it was not only not legal or permitted to divorce, they actually didn't even have a procedure for it. It was as if the idea of divorce would not happen. But then remember, at night, the boys would go to one side and the girls would go to other. So that's kind of weird too. The Christian doctrine of depravity was at the heart of all they did. They really believed men were evil. And so they would kind of live under this idea that you needed to get forgiveness from God. However, they did say if a soldier died in war, that's the same as being a martyr and he would go straight to heaven. They also said if you ran away from battle, it was a cowards. And cowards, as the book of Revelation says, go to hell. They were taught a very strict version of the 10 Commandments and believed every single lustful thought violated the commandment of adultery. I think a lot of people would agree with that. But however, they would say basically for such a sinful people, you'd think they'd look more to Jesus, but they did not. Part of the reason they de-emphasized the New Testament was because they thought the New Testament was a former testament, but that their new visions that their generals and kings had, those were the real new words of Jesus and you could trust them more. And so basically it was like Old Testament's the best, New Testament was kind of good, but even better are the visions that our kings are having. We know them. They speak Chinese, they use our names. These are trustworthy meditations. And so they really just skipped the Jesus Christ part. They understood it, as you could see in the conversations. They understood the merits of the cross, but they also just didn't. All land and private property belong to the king, and they distribute it to everyone. You live in your house, but it's not really your house. It's the king's house, and he allows you to use it. And this sounds like a great system, but really it was just a landlord-tenant system under a different name. Across 1863, the Taiping armies are slowly being pushed back, and by the winter of that year, the situation's looking pretty bad. They had lost the rich valleys that had been feeding them. Their side cities had been captured. One of the best generals, Li, the same guy we mentioned earlier, urged Hong Xiuquan to take a force and flee Nanjing, go south and begin to retake old lands and rebuild the kingdom again further south where it's safer. But Xiuquan flat out refused the idea. He said he in fact took over command and said, I'm going to run the show. It was going great when I ran the show. I've not been doing the job and that's why we're losing. So I'm going to take back over the reins. I'm the guy. And so I'm going to put myself back in charge. He demanded everyone listen to him. If anyone disobeyed anything he said, it was like disobeying God, and you would be executed. Well, he thought this would kind of get the army back on track, but it did the exact opposite. Many people were outraged that Xiuquan, who's been ignoring everything for 8 years or so, was suddenly putting himself back in charge, and 200,000 of his soldiers surrendered to the imperial army, which was dangerous. Remember, they weren't taking surrenders, but they basically said, we're going to die anyway. Instead of a long siege, let's surrender. And the imperial army under Shuang Gofan was smart and said, let him in, let him in. It'll encourage more people to surrender later. Other groups that didn't want to be captured by the Qing and didn't want to put their gamble there, they just ran for it and they would escape out of the siege before it was put in place. Thousands fled, hoping to escape being sieged under Nanjing with the crazy king. By March, the people who hadn't fled were now stuck with the heavenly king and were just going to do whatever he said in the siege. Hong Xiuquan declared that God was waiting for just the right moment to spring up and save them, and he would be on his side. And the siege was not immediately overrun. We're in the year 1864. Although the Qing had tried different techniques, they did struggle to take the city. Over the months, they dug a total of 10 different tunnels to try to break into Nanjing. If you remember, originally it was the Taiping Rebellion dug a tunnel under the wall and entered the city and took it really quickly. Well, the Qing were trying to do that same thing, but the Taiping kept discovering their tunnels and keeping it from happening. At one point, they actually built a second wall so that when the Qing army came out of the tunnel, they were behind another wall basically around the spot where they had built the tunnel. They just kind of tunneled right into a wall that they had built around them. So they were the Taiping Rebellion was fighting well, and they were doing a good job. In June, things had gotten dire, though, for food. Nanjing was still cut off from the world. They didn't have food. And there are 3 different accounts of kind of what happens next. I will start with the one that the General Li gives of what happens. This general, very, kind of loyal, honorable general. He says, Hong Xiuquan saw how desperate things had gotten, and instead of fighting, he killed himself. Now, Hong Xiuquan's son also says what happens. He said, no. He had recently abdicated the throne to himself, the son, while he was only 15, and the Hong Xiuquan had looked for food and accidentally eaten poisonous weeds outside the palace. It was a weed that's called manna, which means bread in Hebrew, but not in Chinese, and so he kind of grabbed that. Personally, I don't think so. I don't think he's stupid enough to not know what a poisonous weed is. But the famous legendary version, this is the one that everyone hears, and I kind of like this one best. It's the most poetic account of how he goes. This version says that Hong Xiuquan, seeing how hungry everyone was, he brings all the followers to the palace, and knowing how bad the need for food was, he told them, go out, grab rocks, and pray that God would turn the rocks to bread. And as they grabbed the rocks, they didn't turn the bread. And he said, that's because you have to eat them first. Eat the rocks, and God will turn them into bread inside your stomachs. And to prove it, Hong Xiuquan ate several of the rocks, so many that the rocks killed him. They did not turn to bread, but they ended up killing him instead. We don't know which of those three versions is how he actually died. All three of them seem to include him eating something to kill himself. You have to wonder if General Lee was trying to give him some credit. I don't know. I kind of prefer the version where he's eating rocks and like a crazy person. But regardless, Hong Xiuquan is dead. The leader of the Taiping Rebellion is now gone. He tried to do something. He's been holding up in Nanjing. The armies have taken their food. Even though they fought back diligently and desperately, they're losing. They didn't flee when they should have. And now their leader, their heavenly kingdom leader, who's been leading the whole show for 14 years, the guy we've been following, he's gone. What do you do now? Well, the General Lee, he takes over military operations. He's very competent, but it's too late. The Qing had already had a huge advantage. Hong Xiuquan was ruining everything while he was holding on to it, and a great competent leader coming in at the last minute isn't enough to save the day. Hong's son, who was in charge, was still also now the guy in charge of the throne, but he's an incompetent 15-year-old. This kid, I feel really bad for him. Pretty much his entire life, his dad has been taking over these cities as calling himself the heavenly king, and now you watch your dad either poison himself or eat rocks and die, and now you're handed the mess, basically, at the end of it. The Qing began to use cannons to hammer the city walls with explosives. At one point, they build a tunnel up to the wall, and they fill it with explosives, a huge 40,000 pounds of explosives right underneath the wall. Their plan is to blow up the wall from underneath. General Lee finds out that's their plan. He sends thousands of soldiers dressed like Qing soldiers in hopes that they could infiltrate the bomb area and kind of pull the plugs on it. However, the Qing realize, hey, these aren't 1,000 of our men. Who are they? And they kill the 1,000 soldiers, so none of them survive. 6 weeks after Hong Xiuquan dies, the bomb goes off and the wall is open, and Nanjing is now in a giant street battle to battle. And the Qing are blown away. The Nanjing people should be starving and willing to surrender, but remember, this is total war. Surrender doesn't get you anything. And so the Nanjing fight street to street for hours, putting up a very successful battle to the very end. And the city in shambles is still able to fight so passionately. General Lee, by the way, of all the people in this story, he just seems like a really loyal and good guy. He rallies his soldiers to the palace, and they fight from midday to midnight. Then he orders a retreat of his soldiers out of Nanjing. He gave the best horse he could to Hong's son. He could have just left this emperor kid on his own and been like, let's get out of here. But he gives his best horse to him. He takes a weaker, sickly horse. As they're riding away, his horse is too old and too weak. So he says to the son, basically, get out of here. I'll hold them off. And Lee sent the son with his men on ahead. And Hong's cousin, by the way, Run Gan, is in that group heading out of there. Lee would wait to be captured. His horse basically gives up. So he just sits down and legit, he takes a nap. And when he gets woken up by Qing soldiers, they take him. He confesses, yeah, I'm the general, and they execute him. Lee's forces of about 1,000 and Hong's sons were able to actually escape. They dressed up like the Qing, like they did before, and they leave right out the the wall they blew up. And the Qing were so busy looting and burning the city, they didn't even check to see who was coming and going. And these guys from the palace are able to escape. Some say that 100,000 people were killed in Nanjing in this fight. However, the historians have ranked that number back down to probably, at this point, Nanjing might have had 20,000 people in it that were able to fight. Of those, we know that 1,000 to 1,500 escaped. Another 7,000 were captured and executed. 13,000 died in the fighting. For Zheng Wuofan, in the 2 years that he sieged it, he said he lost 20,000 men, 10,000 of them dying of disease, though, 9,000 of them dying in the actual fighting. That's pretty low if it's true. So Zheng Wuofan did a really good job. Remember, Zheng Wuofan's the rival guy, and he did a really good job if that's the case. The men that got away were eventually hunted down, even though they made it a really long ways. They were heading back to their region of China where their families kind of controlled things where they would be safe. But Zheng Gofan was able to capture them and kill the remaining loyalists. Hong's son was dragged back, and since he was, quote, the emperor king at that time, he was given the dishonor of death by 1,000 cuts, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a very famous punishment. It was only reserved for the worst of the worst. They would cut you in a way that you would feel pain but would not die, and the goal was to do it very slowly so that you would survive until the end of 1,000 cuts. And they would sometimes this would go on for months where they would just keep cutting you. Other times they would do it all in one day. It seems that Hong's son basically went through the one-day punishment of a really long, painful death, but all done in one day. Some people used to say, oh, the death by 1,000 cuts doesn't exist, and that was just a Western rumor of how barbaric Chinese people were. However, there are actually photos of this death that they did to Hong's son here that actually exist. They're on the darker parts of the internet. I'm not going to go look them up because I have zero desire to see a poor 15-year-old tortured to death by 1,000 cuts. But the proof that they did this is that photo exists, and that it's still how proud the Qing Empire was of it is that we still have it on the internet, 160 years later or so. So they definitely probably did it. And it seems pretty unfair because, again, the 15-year-old son, his dad did all this. He really had no part in it, but the Qing wanted to punish somebody and put the blame on somebody, so they put it on this guy's son. Because remember, Xiuquan ate a bunch of rocks and killed himself. Hung himself could not be killed, however, but they did dig his body up. They burnt it, and then they shot it out of a cannon. They did this because in their, weird Confucian and Buddhist beliefs, they believed that his spirit would now no longer be able to rest and would be forced to wander forever, and that was a punishment enough for them. At the same time, you remember his cousin, Rungan, was also captured. He was executed through 1,000 cuts, it seems the same way. Rungan was, I feel bad. He seemed like he had the best understanding of what was going on. He also was the only person in the Taiping Rebellion who, of these leadership people that were captured, he never recanted. Even in his final confession, he said, we were trying to do good for the God of the Bible. We really were trying to do it. It's interesting to me because he had the most access to the Western foreign missionaries. He had the theology discussions. He knew better than anybody what the empire was doing wrong, and yet he still was committed, basically, we were trying to bring Christianity to China. It's really interesting to me. Was he just hoping, if we get the empire in place, then we can fix the theology, or was he really genuinely confused by his cousin? I mean, he kept getting demoted, and yet he stuck with it. He's a really interesting guy. I'm curious what his faith actually was. Again, was it somebody who's caught in a bad system, but he's trying to make it better, or was he genuinely deceived? I can't tell. Some generals did escape, though, and they would take their armies with them. One guy has just one of those wild lives that when I read about it, I had to put it in the story because it's almost impossible to believe. This guy was basically a captain general in the Taiping army. When Nanjing fell and the Qing chased down people, he was able to escape. He went down to the south of China, but he realized the Qing were not giving up. They were going after every single Taiping person, no matter where they went. And so he and 200 of his loyal men decided to, let's leave China. And they went into local Vietnam. Eventually, he and his 200 men became a group of bandits that they called themselves the Black Flags, and they ended up dominating all the other bandits of the Vietnam region. And the Vietnamese, instead of coming after them and saying hey, we want to kill you, they actually said, hey, can you help us fight against the French colony? And so he said, you know what, sure, why not? They fought against the French colony and they failed. But somehow, as they failed, he kept getting more powerful. So he went from basic bandit group to warlord to general in the Vietnam army against the French. Eventually, it wasn't safe for him to stay in Vietnam anymore, so him and his men escaped to Taiwan. While they're in Taiwan, the Chinese are forced to give up Taiwan because the Japanese invade, but the Taiwanese don't want to give up their land, so they declare themselves the Republic of Formosa. Their president flees the country when it looks like Japan is going to take it over, or he may have died. It's kind of unclear. And so this guy, the Black Flags bandit, once Taiping captain, takes over Taiwan, which is crazy because Taiwan is this Chinese island. The Japanese are invading. The president disappears. So the only guy left to run it is this guy. And so this all of the soldiers he's commanding are Qing Empire soldiers and generals, but they're being commanded by a former captain of the Taiping Rebellion who had hidden out in Vietnam for 20 years. He was hiding in Taiwan and now is literally running this island in an army against the Japanese. The equivalent would be like if Hawaii was invaded in World War II, and the only person in charge was a Southern Confederate criminal who had escaped the Union for decades, and now he was running the entire Union Army of Hawaii. It's basically like the only way I can think to parallel what this guy was doing. They were able to resist Japan for 3 to 4 months, but eventually Japan was able to take it, but this guy does not die there. He ends up, after another 20 years, living off and on other places. He returns to China, he writes down his memoirs, and he's kind of become a folk hero. He's a bit of a Davy Crockett kind of guy where everyone loves him. He's a general who became an expat, who fought against corruption. He defeated the Qing Empire and outlived them. And he always tried to do what was right for China, or at least that's what the story says, right? And he also fought Europeans and Japanese wherever he could. It's just kind of a cool story. And you look at him and you go, man, that guy lived a life. You'd love to sit down and hear his story from his perspective. Two other important people who get away, and you've just... The Taiping Rebellion is just a story that just, the more you unravel it, the more you go, what on earth was happening? Two last leaders to mention. These are just crazy to me. One was a high-up general, a vice prime minister, who for some reason, when they captured the city, they just let him go. His name was Lai Hongying, and I tried to learn why he was let go. He was a brother-in-law to Hong Xiuquan. He seems like he'd be a big deal, but for whatever reason, as they were punishing people, they're like, let that guy go. The first president of China, the Republic of China, not to be confused with the People's Republic of China, which is the Communist Party that rules today, but when the Republic of China between World War I and World War II is running the show, that first president would actually meet with Lai Hongying. They would talk about things. He would share his life under the Taiping rule, and they were friends. So this guy who was the vice prime minister of Nanjing, who was the brother-in-law of Hong Xiuquan, he gets off easy and ends up being friends with world leaders and has a good time. And one of the other leaders who gets off is a brother of Hong Xiuquan. He's one of those kings. Remember I told you the Blessed King, the Peace King? He's one of them. I tried to figure out which one he was, but I couldn't. His name is Hong Xiuquan. And he also escaped somehow alive. When Nanjing is being captured, he flees, and he ends up making it to Hong Kong. And it shouldn't be a big deal. It's just kind of crazy that one of the really important people is able to escape. Except he doesn't stop there. 48 years later, in 1903, 38 years later, in 1903, he will try to start another rebellion. At the age of 70, he teams up with a guy named Sun Tai, and the two of them together start what is basically supposed to be a new Taiping Rebellion in the year 1903 in the Guangzhou, southern China area. They call it the Heavenly Kingdom. The Great Meng Sheng, they're purposely trying to name it after the Taiping Rebellion, and they're trying to get people to join them. They say, hey, you hate the Qing? I'm the former king of the Taiping Rebellion. Let's do this thing and try it again. But this kingdom, it's going to be Christian like the last one, but we're also going to make it a constitutional monarchy or a democratic republic. We'll figure it out when we get there. That's literally, they hadn't decided yet, but it was going to be better. We're not going to have one crazy king rule it all. And they did all of this planning in this one guy's apartment, the Sun Tai's guy's apartment, and Hong Xiuquan raised money, telling people like, hey, we're starting the Taiping Rebellion. We're getting the band back together. Come on, we're going to do this thing. They put these plans together in Hong Kong. They set up buildings to recruit things, and they were going to start it by blowing up a big important building in the southern China. They began baptizing triad. Remember I told you these criminal groups called the triads. They baptized them in on the plan. That was how it was going to go. Well, they were going to blow up the regional palace of Guangzhou, and that would be the sign of starting the uprising. They actually did plant a bomb, and they did blow it up, and people did die. However, the Hong Kong police had managed to catch up on their plan and tipped off the people of Guangzhou. They weren't able to stop the bomb from going off, but they were able to lessen the impact, and it would have been a lot more people killed if the police hadn't been in on it. All the recruiting stations were raided at the same time. 20 leaders were arrested. Weapons were seized. The revolutionaries were no longer able to get any help on the black market, and this guy's plan to reinstate the Taiping Rebellion fell apart. This event is called the Shuntian Uprising, and it was the last attempt to bring a Christian kingdom nation in China. Hong Xiuquan cut his hair and beard and left Hong Kong and snuck into Singapore. He never got captured. Again, he managed to evade the police. But when he got older, he actually moved back to Hong Kong, disguised himself, and chose to live there. This entire event was completely not really in the record books at all and was forgotten about until and where this guy was buried was unknown until Sun Tai's grandson, a historian, went out of his way to look for him. He'd heard the stories from his grandpa. He wanted to find this guy's burial, and he did find his burial plot in Hong Kong. And so that's the last of what happened to the revolutionary leaders that joined the Taiping Rebellion. And Xuan Fu, I mean, this guy, he's a part of 2 different rebellions, gets to be the top dog in both of them, really, and he actually gets off easy dying as an old man. I mean, that's not too bad for him. Zheng Guofan, the rival of Hong Xiuquan, the guy that they put up against him, he gets the nickname the Butcher for all the killing he does of the Taiping. He did his best to help quell the Neon Rebellion. However, he wasn't as good as dealing with the Muslim rebellion as he was the Christian one. And so in 1870, they didn't, kill him like the other guys. They respected what he did with the Taiping too much, but they retired him out and said, "You've done enough. We're going to make you the Viceroy of Nanjing, and you can live there." He ends up setting up shop in Hong Xiuquan's old home. And he actually seems to run this place pretty well. He set up schools and started teaching people. The classes he graduated, many of them went off to the United States to be Western educated, and then many of them would end up becoming future titans of industry later on in China. Guo Fan was considered the guy who got kind of Nanjing back on its feet after the Taiping Rebellion and really devastated it. Then it says in 1872, he died mysteriously. I looked everywhere to see what this meant. Why did his death in 1872 was mysterious? It just seems to be that he was healthy, and then about 30 minutes, he suddenly went from perfectly healthy to suddenly dying all of a sudden, and because he lived in Xiuquan's old home, it was mysterious. However, if you look at his diary, he does have a couple entries where he says, I feel numb, I have a headache, I don't feel very well, and so it wasn't completely out of nowhere. It seems like he probably died of apoplexy or something of that sort. He was only 62, but he lived a pretty stressful, busy life. I think the main mystery of it was just purely that he was dying in his old enemy's house, basically. All right. Well, that's everybody. We've covered the Taiping Rebellion from top to bottom. You've heard the story. And now the question is, what do we do? What do we do with this information and this story? The Qing Empire literally points to this moment as one of the major things that caused it to fall, but it would take another 60 years before it truly toppled. But at the same time, all of the problems that the Qing Empire went through just kept getting worse and worse. Until it just wasn't able to recover from this. And this was one of those big nails in the coffin that most people point to as a moment where it starts to really come apart. As for cultural impacts, China was a republic for a little while after the Qing Empire. They greatly elevated and respected the Taiping Rebellion as anti-Qing, but they kind of dropped the Christian stuff. After time, the anti-Qing elements kept getting worse, and when the communists took over, Mao loved the Taiping Rebellion. They were sharing property, they were proto-communists, as he used, and they really elevated the Taiping as these wonderful, amazing men that you should follow. They completely obviously dropped the Christian aspect of it, but they made them heroes for almost beating the Qing Empire with their proto-communist way of doing things. And remember, I did tell you that Karl Marx himself was like, yeah, those are proto-communists. We like what they're doing. The Qing, however, before they went out of power, they started killing the people group that Hong Xiuquan was related to, the Hakka people, and they went on a complete genocide of them. At their height, they were killing 30,000 Hakka people a day. That's a lot of people. And in the Guangdong region, 1 million people from that family group were killed just for being related to Hong Xiuquan and just being a part of a group of people that they'd had a hard time controlling for a while. A lot of these people had lived in this region since the year 200 BC, but now they are the most scattered group of people around the world, with 80 to 100 million of the group of people called the Hakka people now living outside of China, even though they are ethnically considered Chinese. There was also a war that kind of happened between these groups of people, but we've talked a lot about the wars and confusion there. What about lasting religious changes? Did this Christian kingdom help bring Christianity? Not really. As you saw by the missionaries, it wasn't really Christianity. Even the ones that were kind of understanding the work of Jesus Christ were really struggling. The main story that we learn from, the main impact I always see in the story is the young man who arrived in Shanghai at the height of this war. He showed up while Shanghai was on fire, while bullets were flying, while cannonballs were landing around the city. He was taking care of the wounded. He helped run a hospital, and for years he saw some of the most brutal deaths and injuries that war could bring him, and he was hardened, toughened, and made a better missionary because of what he was able to see. His own life was nearly lost multiple times. At one point, while reading a book outside, a cannonball lands next to him. Another point, he looks outside of a house and the cannonball lands right behind him. And another point, he almost gets shot when a bunch of soldiers invade an area. He stood by the gates. He heard the gunfire. He saw the shopkeepers. He saw dying. He saw all of this. And this young man who arrived in Shanghai in the year 1860, Hudson Taylor, would then go on to found one of the most important ministries of all time. He too, like Hong Xiuquan, was saved by a pamphlet. In his younger years, he read a tract and it brought him to Christ. He would found the China Inland Mission, and millions of the people would eventually hear the gospel either directly through him or through the people that he sent and worked around him. But I always say, every time I've ever talked about Hudson Taylor, try to imagine what it would be like to share the love of Jesus with people and say, hey, I know you're hurting. I know you just got a bullet, whatever. But, you need to hear about Jesus Christ. He loves you. And they would look at you and go, Jesus Christ, wasn't it his brother that almost is causing this war, that's causing all the problems? And just imagine all the pain and frustration. Hudson Taylor himself almost died in riots, was almost killed by bandits. He was robbed multiple times. If you want to hear the full story, Martyrs and Missionaries at least did a 3-part series on the life of Hudson Taylor, or go listen to one of our mini sermons we brought back from him. Hong and Hudson both came to Christ through tracts, and almost as if Satan knew God was eventually going to send a great man like Hudson Taylor, he prepared a similar person to kind of cut him off at the head, Taiping Rebellion. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe God looked at what the Taiping Rebellion was coming and going, okay, that's your guy. Now let me send you my guy in here. But either way, this is the story of Hong Xiuquan. His failure did not mean the end of Christianity in China. Eventually, Hudson Taylor would help, along with many others, establish a Christian church in China. But it is a wild story from top to bottom. Joel, let me hear some of your thoughts.
Yeah, it seems like, would you say one of the last straws, because in the way you presented it, you kind of made it sound like towards the end there, the unendorsement, the non-existing endorsement of the Christians, where it's kind of like the last thing that kind of scuttled the movement, like would you say that's an accurate assessment to have that it seemed like, again, it sounded like in the way you were framing it, that kind of took the last bit of wind out of their sails, and then it was just kind of downhill until they were taken over a few years after that. Do you feel like that's an accurate assessment?
I think that is very accurate. I think at least for the Taiping Rebellion, they really thought that the Christian kingdoms would come in and work together with them to overthrow the evil demonic empire, the Qing Empire. And they were surprised that the missionaries were looking at their work and going, what a disaster. Mm-hmm. I don't know that, maybe the missionaries would have gone back and written all these things and maybe public sentiment wouldn't have changed, but it is not a unfair idea. I mean, the missionaries had written back and been like, guys, this is a great Christian kingdom. Let's pour all of our resources. Churches and people told their leader. It really could have changed the course of things. But the other side of it too is they seem to put too much stock into Europeans and foreigners. They seem to think if you're European or American, you're Christian, and so of course you will support us. And they ran into the hard reality that there are Europeans that do not care about Jesus and will shoot you down because they're making money off of you. And that idea that a European wouldn't care about Jesus did not seem to enter their heads. Like that seemed completely foreign to them as well.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting how they can have a pretty good run at this with the numbers that they had to work with for the amount of time that they had to work with. It's a very specific thing in a specific time in a specific location, that like you can never imagine being replicated anywhere else at any time. It's like it had to be specifically in China during that specific time with those specific peoples that allowed such a phenomenon to thrive as long as it did.
Well, and I would agree with that completely. Like to the degree that they did it in Asia, I don't know how you could do that again. But the parallel, I would say, is when you look at what the Mormons have done in Utah, when you look at, I originally started the story by comparing it to the Anabaptists in Munster, and having finished the story, I mean, maybe you can also see where I saw those parallels, you know what I mean? Like you can see all of these false movements throughout history there just seems to be like a pattern where one guy starts to lead them. They look like Christians on the outside. They try to build something with force, and then it just kind of falls apart as eventually all the false prophecies and all of it just kind of goes by the wayside, and the leader just gives up a line. Very similar stories happen multiple times throughout history. So I do agree with you completely. The Taiping Rebellion, like I don't even know how you could possibly repeat something so bloody that caused so many to die. Again, it's theoretically the second bloodiest event in human history, even bloodier than World War I on the one hand. And on the other side, it is something that you see every time these false cults promise to build a Christian kingdom through the working of a false teacher. It goes through the same the same swings and misses. It is just, to me, I think that's kind of one of the more fascinating aspects about it, is both how familiar the story is if you know church history, and then how unique this version of it is.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for presenting it to us and delivering it to us and allowing it to be a part of our Revive Thoughts feed here. A fine addition to our collection.
Thanks. I will say there are some movies and stuff here and there kind of made about it, but I don't know that anybody's, from a Christian world, I don't know that anybody's really ever tackled this subject in detail that I have found, where Christians are looking at it and going, let's talk about the Christianity of this event. In fact, I had to do a lot of research, even finding those letters from those missionaries. I mean, that was an obscure, basically, text that I've never seen anybody talk about. It was both a lot of fun to research and very difficult to get clear, like, what happened here, and is this good or is this bad, and what was, especially for me, from beginning to end, I was trying to figure out what was the theology, what was it like, because here's kind of a thought I had as I walked through this. The Word of God never returns void, right? For 15 years, these guys were reading the Bible, and they were going to church, and my brain tells me, okay, so shouldn't there have been some fruit along the way from the work that they were doing? And yet the answer is no, not really, no. And it really just kind of goes to show that, yes, the Word of God does not return void, but it does not return, empty, but He is not going to bless a movement that is not about the true Jesus Christ of the gospel. And although these guys were reading the Bible, they were really truly were a cult in a lot of ways. And if there were some believers mixed in, like the missionary said, there might have been a few that had the light, but there's so much darkness even in them, it's hard to tell what's going on. But it just was such a mess that God is not going to bless that, and He did not enter into it. And I think it's a good reminder for us today, if we are trying to, emulate things by threatening people to follow us with the sword or, whatever. I don't think people are doing that, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not going to work. We have to have solid Christ-like leaders leading this thing. Just getting people to read their Bible and go to church very clearly is not going to be the thing that's going to make the difference. Many groups have tried that throughout the years, and it ended up as absolutely disastrous results when it's not coupled with godly leadership following God's direction.
Absolutely. Okay, revivethoughts@gmail.com. If you have an idea for a deep dive topic, let us know, and we can put it on the docket. We enjoy doing these. Yeah. Do you have any other ideas about what might be next, Roy?
I was telling my wife, Elise, today, I said, after I finish recording this is the first time in Revive Thoughts history where I do not have another deep dive lined up. I don't even have usually it's like, okay, I finished this one so I can move on to the next one. I got this. It's not that I'm, out of ideas. It's not that we've drained, history dry here. It's just, this is the first time where I've actually kind of like, okay, what interests me? Where can we go from here? I kind of was I thought I would do the French Revolution next, but I kind of put that together as a shorter episode that went out a couple months ago. So I feel now I'm on clear waters to sail in any direction we would choose. So if you do have a topic, this is the perfect time to email it in.
revivethoughts@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you. And until next time, Troy, do you have anything else?
No, I hope you enjoyed listening to multiple hours of Taiping Rebellion. I will say when I look at other Christian podcasts and the subjects they do, and then I look at us and I'm like, we have a 3-parter on Ethiopia. We have a London fire episode. Now we have like 4 hours of content on China's rebellions. We're definitely hitting subjects and stuff that no one else is talking. I don't mean like we're hitting stuff that no one else. Sometimes I'm like, are we hitting stuff that no one else is talking about because people don't want to know? But to me, I'm just like, how are we not fascinated by these stories? They're directly impactful to Christians. They impacted millions of people's lives. They're important parts of church history that for some reason, just from my perspective, to me, it's like, why is no one else talking about this? Like, this seems like it would be a really interesting discussion. It's absolutely a wild story from top to bottom. And I just feel like it has a lot of relevance for today. So I don't know. I don't see other people talking about these things. Hopefully, putting this story out there, we'll start to see more people start to take an interest in this stuff. And I do hope that over time, as church history, I think, is starting to become more popular, we'll see more of these stories. Not just us out there, but more people starting to dig in and go, what on earth happened back here or there, and why did it turn out the way it did? But in the meantime, this is Troy and Joel, and this is Revived Thoughts Deep Dive.